Welcome back to Potter Red, where the legends of the wizarding world get told the way they should have gone. Today's adventure: Harry returned a stolen goblin crown at age 5, and the Forgemasters swore him an iron oath. If you're new around here, do me a favor and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. Chapter 1: The Doorstop. King Harry Potter was 5 years old, and he had already worked out 3 things about adults that they would have denied to his face. The first was that adults said, "because I said so," precisely when they had no reason at all, which meant the phrase was useful, because it told you exactly where the soft places in their thinking were. The second was that Uncle Vernon got louder when he was wrong and quieter when he was right, so the volume of a thing was a clue to its truth, only backwards. The third was the strangest, and Harry kept it the way you keep a coin you found in the gutter, turning it over in the dark of the cupboard under the stairs. Sometimes, when he wanted a thing very much and stopped wanting it out loud, the thing happened. A teacher's wig went blue. A jumper that Aunt Petunia was forcing over his head shrank until it would not even fit a doll. Harry had not told anyone about the third thing. You did not have to be clever to know that the third thing was the kind that got you shouted at, and Harry was clever. On the morning everything changed, the cupboard smelled of dust and floor polish and the faint cooked toast warmth that came through the wall from the kitchen, and Harry lay on his back with his hands behind his head, listening to the house wake up. "He's not staying here on his own," Aunt Petunia was saying in the hallway in the voice she used when she had already lost and wanted to lose loudly. "The last time we left him, the Pollard's cat got into the bins and somehow it was on our front step, Vernon on our step, looking at me. Then he comes," said Uncle Vernon, who wanted his Saturday and did not want a discussion. "And he keeps his hands in his pockets and his mouth shut or there's no supper, that clear boy." Harry had learned not to answer questions that were really threats. He got up and put on the gray jumper that had been Dudley's and would one day, by the look of it, be Dudley's again, and he went and stood by the front door with his hands already in his pockets to save time. The plan, as far as Harry could reconstruct it from the bits adults dropped, was this. There was a church hall 2 villages over, and the church hall was having what Aunt Petunia called a charity bazaar and Uncle Vernon called a load of other people's rubbish. And Aunt Petunia wanted to go because Yvonne from number 11 had found a genuine Royal Dalton at the last one for 50 pence, and Aunt Petunia would rather have eaten the doily off her own table than let Yvonne find better rubbish than she did. Dudley was coming because Dudley always came, and because there would be a cake stall. Harry was coming because the Pollard's cat had looked at Aunt Petunia. It was a long drive in the back of the car, with Dudley taking up 1.5 seats and an elbow's worth of Harry's. Harry spent it watching the hedges go by and counting the red cars, because counting was a thing you could do that nobody could take away from you, and because he had noticed that if you gave your mind a small, dull job, it stopped chewing on the big, sharp ones. By the time they parked on the verge outside St. Botolph's, he had counted 41 red cars and decided that the driver who had cut them up at the roundabout was the kind of person who said, "because I said so." The church hall was packed and hot and smelled of tea urns and old paper. Trestle tables ran in long rows under the high windows, and every table was an avalanche of things that had once mattered to someone and now cost 20 pence. There were jigsaw boxes with a sticker that promised all pieces present in a handwriting that did not inspire confidence. There were chipped teapots and a basket of single gloves and a stuffed owl under a glass dome that Dudley wanted at once and was refused, which made Dudley make the noise he made. "Stay where I can see you," said Aunt Petunia to Harry, which was a lie, because she immediately stopped being able to see anything except a table of china at the far end, where a woman in a green coat was already lifting a plate to the light. Aunt Petunia went off across the hall like a destroyer making for harbor. Uncle Vernon followed Dudley to the cake stall. And Harry, who had been told to stay where he could be seen by someone who had stopped looking, did the sensible thing and went to the part of the hall nobody else wanted. Every jumble sale has a country that the grown-ups do not visit. It is usually in a corner, near the fire door, where the light from the high windows gives out. The good tables get crowded and the bad tables get picked over, and then there's the last table, the one the volunteers fill with the boxes that came in marked house clearance and were never sorted because nobody had the heart. That was where Harry went, because the crowds were everywhere else, and because a person who is small learns that the best place to be is the place where elbows are not. On the way there he did a thing that no one saw, which was usual, because no one watched Harry except when they wanted to be cross at him. An old woman ahead of him, navigating the crush with a stick in one hand and a carrier bag in the other, dropped something small and bright that rolled under the trestle skirt and out of her notice, and went on, and was swallowed by the crowd around the china. Harry got down on the sticky floor among the feet and found it, a little oval of painted glass on a pin, a brooch with a faded violet in it, the sort of thing that costs nothing and means a great deal, because no one paints a violet on glass for a stranger. He could have kept it. A person who is given nothing learns the exact weight of a thing he could keep. He looked at the violet for a moment, and then he wormed back out through the forest of legs and went after the old woman and tugged very carefully at her sleeve, because he had learned that you tugged carefully or you got your hand smacked away. "You dropped this," he said, and held it up. The old woman looked down at him and then at the brooch, and her face did something complicated and slow. "Oh," she said. "Oh, my Albert gave me that. 60 years. I'd have walked home not knowing." She took it in fingers that shook and pinned it back over her heart, and she looked at Harry the way almost no one looked at Harry, as if he were a piece of unexpected good news. "You're a good boy," she said. "You're a good little boy. Where's your mum?" "I don't have one," said Harry, who was truthful, and watched the good news go out of her face and be replaced by something he did not have a word for and did not like. And so he said, "It's all right," to comfort her, which was a strange way round for a 5-year-old and an old woman to stand. And then he slipped off into the crowd before she could ask him anything else, because questions were the price of being noticed, and Harry could not always afford it. That was where Harry went then, down past the edge of the light, to the country at the end of the hall. The last table had a man behind it. He was old in the way that fence posts are old, gray, and a bit lichened, and clearly going to outlast the fence. He had a cardigan the color of weak tea and eyes that were a great deal more awake than the rest of him, and he was reading a paperback with no cover, and he did not look up when Harry arrived, which Harry appreciated. Adults who looked up wanted something. Adults who kept reading were safe for a while. A cardboard sign in front of him said in felt tip, "Everything on this table 10p. Unsold goes to the tip." Underneath, smaller, added later and crosser, "One further word, please." Harry looked at the table. It was wonderful. It was the kind of wonderful that the good tables, with their priced and polished things, could never be, because everything here had given up on being wanted and so had nothing to prove. There was a brass doorknob with no door. There was a wooden box full of keys that opened nothing anyone alive could name. There was a clock with one hand. There was a tin soldier who had lost his rifle and his paint and most of one boot and stood at attention anyway, which Harry respected. He moved along the table slowly, with his hands behind his back like a small inspector, and old Tibbet turned a page. And at the end of the table, holding the fire door open against the draught, sat a crown. Harry knew it was a crown the way you know a dog is a dog even when it is a very strange dog. It had the shape of a crown, a band and points, the way a child draws one, but it was wrong for a crown in every other way. It was black, not the black of paint, but the black of iron that has been in a fire and a flood and 100 years of being ignored. It was heavy. You could see it was heavy by the way it sat, the way it had pressed a dent into the cheap carpet tile beneath it. It was not beautiful. The points were not even, and along the band ran a row of marks that might have been decoration and might have been damage, little notches and grooves that caught the bad light and held onto it longer than they should have. Someone had decided this object's purpose in life was to stop a door blowing shut. Harry felt, looking at it, the particular indignation that only a 5-year-old who has himself been assigned the smallest and least wanted role in a household can feel on behalf of an object. He crouched down in front of it. This is the part that Harry would never be able to explain properly, not to Doric, not to the Forgemasters, not to anyone, though many of them would ask. He crouched down and the noise of the hall went quiet, not all at once and not really. The tea urn still hissed and Dudley still made his noise somewhere far off. But it went quiet the way a room goes quiet when a clock you had stopped hearing stops ticking. There was a sound under the world that Harry had not known was there until it changed, and now it had changed and it was coming from the crown. It was a sound like hammering, far off, under stone. A great slow ringing, blow after blow, the way you might hear a church bell 3 valleys away and feel it in your teeth before your ears agreed. It was not loud, it was deep. It came up through the carpet tile and the church floor and the old cold earth of England and into the bones of Harry's knees where he crouched, and it said nothing in words because it was not words, but if Harry had been forced to put a word to it, the word would have been here, here, here. He reached out and put one finger on the band of the crown. The iron was not cold. That was the first wrong thing. Everything in the hall was cold, the brass doorknob and the keys and the tin soldier, because the church hall was cold and stone things take the cold and keep it. But the crown was warm under his finger, blood warm, the warmth of a thing that has been held, and along the band the little notches and grooves were warmer still, and Harry understood, the way you understand a thing in a dream and only doubt it after, that the notches were not damage. They were writing. They were writing in a hand that was not the felt-tip hand of the sign, not any hand he had ever seen, angular and deep and certain, and the writing was warm because the writing was awake. "That," said old Tibbet, "won't stay sold." Harry took his finger back. The hammering did not stop, but it went quiet again, back under the floor of the world where it had been waiting, apparently, for a very long time. He looked up. Tibbet had put down his coverless paperback and was looking at Harry over it, and his awake eyes had gone, if anything, more awake. "I haven't bought it," said Harry, because he was a truthful child and because Tibbet's grammar was strange. "You can't unsell a thing I haven't bought." "No," agreed Tibbet, "but I've sold it twice and it's come back twice, and the second fellow brought it back in a wheelbarrow and wouldn't say why and wouldn't take his 10p, so I've stopped saying I've sold it. I say it won't stay sold." He nodded at the crown. You felt that then. It was not a question, which was unusual because adults asked questions even when they knew the answers, to make you say the answer and so to make the answer theirs. Tibbet simply said it and waited the way you wait for water to find its own level. Harry was cautious. He had 3 rules, and one of them was that the third thing got you shouted at, and he had a strong suspicion that what he had just felt belonged to the family of the third thing. Felt what? He said. Tibbet smiled, and it was not unkind. Right, he said. Good lad, you hold on to that. Most people your size would have said yes. He reached out and picked the crown up off the floor, and Harry saw that it was heavy for him too, that he braced for it, that the cord stood out on the back of his old hand. He set it on the table among the keyless keys and the rifleless soldier, and it sat there being blacker and older and more itself than anything else on the table, the way one real thing among toys will always look slightly like a hole cut in the world. My name's Tibbet, he said. I do the house clearances nobody else will touch. Old families, things in attics that the heirs don't want to be alone in a room with. You learn to tell which things are just old and which things are old and minding. That one's minding. He tapped the iron band once and took his finger back fast, the way you do off a stove you've been burned by before. Came out of a place in the north, came in a chest that took 4 men, and 3 of them got headaches, and the 4th one was me, and I get the dreams instead. I've had it 11 years. I've sold it twice and given it once, and it always comes home to my table, and do you know I think I'm glad, because I'd not like to think of it lost. Things ought not to be lost, even minding things, especially minding things. Harry listened to this with the whole of his attention, which was a considerable thing, because Harry's attention was almost never wanted, and so was almost always available in full. What does it mind? He asked. Tibbet looked at him for a long moment. Across the hall, Aunt Petunia's voice rose in triumph and fell in negotiation. She had found her royal Dalton, or something she could call one in front of Yvonne. Going home, said Tibbet. That's my guess. I've had 11 years of dreams to guess in. It minds that it's not where it should be, and it minds that the ones it belongs to don't know where it is, and it's been minding so long and so hard that it's worn a groove in the world, and a person who's quiet enough inside can hear the groove humming. He picked up his coverless paperback again, found his place, and added, without looking up, in the offhand voice adults use for the most important thing they will say to you all day, "You're quiet enough inside, aren't you, poor scrap, I can tell." Harry did not know what to do with that, so he did what he always did with a thing he did not know what to do with. He put it away to look at later in the dark where he kept his coins. Take it, said Tibbet. Harry's hands were still in his pockets. I haven't got 10p. I'm not selling it. Weren't you listening? I can't sell it. It won't go. Tibbet turned a page he could not possibly have read. I'm giving it. There's a difference, and the difference is the whole of it, though you're too young to know that yet, and I'm too old to explain it. Take it. Maybe it'll go home for a quiet one where it wouldn't go home for a price. That'd be a thing, wouldn't it? That'd be the first sensible thing that's happened on this table in 11 years. One thing, said Tibbet, before Harry's hands had left his pockets, and his voice had changed, gone careful. The way a voice goes careful around the edge of a deep hole it has decided to walk a child past rather than around. That's not man work. I want you to know that, since you're the one taking it on, and a person ought to know what he's carrying. I've handled a deal of old things, dwarvish-looking things and Roman things and things with no business being in a Yorkshire farmhouse, and I know man work when I hold it, because man work is proud of itself. It wants you to see how clever it was. That iron isn't proud, that iron is sure. There's a difference, and the difference will save your life one day if you learn it young. Whatever hammered that band wasn't showing off for anybody. It was telling the truth in metal, every stroke true as a plumb line, and there's only one kind of folk I've ever heard of that works iron like it's under oath. He stopped. He seemed for a moment on the very edge of saying the word, and then he looked at how small Harry was and chose not to, the way you choose not to hand a child a knife by the blade. Old folk, he said instead. Underground folk. They lost something long ago, and they never stopped being sure about it. You mind that iron knows whose it is, even when nobody else does. Iron's got a long memory, longest there is. Harry stored most of what adults said in a back room of himself, to be fetched out later if it ever turned out to matter. This he did not store. He kept it in the front of both hands, listening to old Tibbet's careful voice in the dead corner of the hall, because he understood that it was the truest thing anyone had bothered to tell him in the whole 5 years of his life, and the truest things you do not put away anywhere. You carry them. And here Harry hesitated, and the hesitation is worth recording, because everyone afterward would assume that Harry took the crown because it was treasure, and Harry had not thought of it as treasure even once. He hesitated because he was 5 and he had been told, in 600 different ways, that he was not allowed to have things. Things were Dudley's. Wanting things was a punishable offense in the dictionary of number 4 Privet Drive, somewhere between worthlessness and ingratitude. To reach out and take a thing in public with his own hand because a grown-up said he might, was an act so far outside the law of his life that his arm did not at first believe it was permitted to perform it. Then the hammering came up through the floor again, very soft here, and Harry thought, in the clear flat way he thought his most dangerous thoughts, it doesn't want to be lost, I know what that's like. He took the crown, it was heavy. He had to use both hands and brace his elbows on his knees the way Tibbet had braced, and even so it tipped him forward an inch before he got under it. It was warm all the way around, and the warmth went up his arms and settled somewhere behind his ribs and stayed there, like a swallow of soup on a cold day, like the idea of a fire seen through a window. The hammering this close was not loud, but it was everywhere in the iron and in his hands and in the floor, and he realized in his own pulse, which had begun without his permission to keep the time of it, 1 and 1 and 1. There, said Tibbet, and went back to his book like a man who has finally set down a load he has carried up a long hill. Harry stood up with the crown held against his chest and turned around to find that the country at the end of the hall was, as ever, empty, and that nobody had seen him commit the crime of being given something. He had a problem, and Harry was good at problems. The problem was that he could not walk up to Aunt Petunia carrying a black iron crown the size of a chamber pot, because Aunt Petunia would either take it away or, worse, ask where it came from, and a strange old man gave it to me for nothing, was the sort of true answer that got a person locked in a cupboard for a long weekend. He needed the crown to be invisible, or he needed to be invisible, and since the second had occasionally happened before, around the edges of the third thing, Harry stood very still in the dead corner of the hall and did the thing he was not supposed to be able to do. He did not strain at it. He had learned that straining made it shy, the way a word you're reaching for goes further off the harder you reach. He simply, with the part of him that had gone quiet enough to hear the crown, wanted very much for nobody to notice what he carried, and then he stopped wanting it out loud and let the wanting sink down to where the hammering was, and the two of them, the wanting and the hammering, seemed to recognize each other. The crown grew lighter, not weightless, lighter the way a bucket of water is lighter when a friend takes the other handle. And a kind of not-there-ness settled over it, a quality Harry had no word for then, and would later hear a goblin call Durhammer, the iron's old trick of being beneath notice, and which the crown apparently still remembered how to do even after 100 years of holding open a fire door, because some skills you do not forget, you only wait to use. Harry walked the length of the church hall with a stolen goblin crown held openly against his chest, and 300 people did not see it. Aunt Petunia saw him. "There you are," she said, not looking, holding her royal Dalton plate up to the light with the trembling reverence of a woman who has beaten Yvonne. "What have you been doing? Nothing, I hope. Stand there and don't touch. Vernon, Vernon, I found it. Tell Yvonne I've found it." Her eyes went over Harry and over the crown and registered a small grey nephew being tediously present, and went back to the plate, and that was all. Harry stood there and did not touch, and held the iron and felt it being unseen, and felt in a way that had no name and would not get one for some years, that the two of them were keeping a secret together, and that it had been a long time since either of them had had anyone to keep one with. Getting the crown into the house was a campaign, and Harry planned it as he planned everything, by working out where the adults would be looking and then being somewhere else. The danger was the front hall, where coats came off and bags were set down, and Aunt Petunia took a full inventory of everyone with a glance that missed nothing she cared about and everything she did not. Harry waited in the car a beat longer than he was allowed to, until Uncle Vernon had the boot open and the bags of jumble in his arms and his view of the back seat blocked by his own importance. And then Harry slid out with the crown held flat against his front under his folded arms, still wearing its not-there-ness like a coat 2 sizes too big, and walked into the house in the exact shadow of Dudley, who could be relied upon to fill a doorway and to want loudly. Whatever was being carried past the kitchen, which today was a Battenberg the size of a brick. "Cupboard," said Aunt Petunia to Harry, meaning go to it, and for once Harry obeyed an instruction with his whole heart, because the cupboard was precisely where he wished to be. He got the crown under the loose floorboard at the back, the one he had worked free over a wet fortnight last winter, and under which he kept the things that were his. A marble with a galaxy in it, a key that fit nothing, a paperback with the cover torn off, which he now understood with a quiet private start was the same kind of book old Tibbet had been reading, and which made him feel, absurdly, that he and the old man were in a club. The crown did not want to go under the board. It was too big by a finger's width, and Harry had to turn it and ease it and whisper to it, and in the end it seemed to decide for itself to fit, because the board went down flatter than it had any business doing over an object that size, and the iron sat in the cold dark under the floor of the cupboard under the stairs, which was about as lost and as low as a thing could get in number 4, and yet Harry thought, lying on the boards above it with his cheek to the wood, it did not feel lost any more. It felt like it was somewhere on purpose. It felt faintly warm even through the board, the way a cat you cannot see is warm when it has been sleeping on a chair. Dinner nearly undid him. He was allowed to the table on jumbled days because there was no one to leave him with, and being at the table meant being looked at, and being looked at was a thing Harry had spent 5 years learning to survive. He sat on the hard chair with the wobbly leg, which was his, and he ate the 2 fish fingers and the spoon of peas that were his slowly, to make them last, while Dudley built and demolished a fortress of chips across the table and Uncle Vernon explained Pemberton's failures with drills to a wife who had stopped listening at the front door. Harry kept his eyes down and his hands quiet and his mind on the warm thing under the floorboard, and it was the warm thing that nearly betrayed him, because Dudley, sliding off his chair to fetch the ketchup, stopped halfway across the kitchen and frowned at the cupboard door. "Something's humming," Dudley announced in the voice of a boy who has found a grievance and intends to wear it out. "In the cupboard, I can hear it." The fork stopped on the way to Harry's mouth. He put it down without a sound and made his face into the face he used, the flat, patient nothing face, the one that gave the adults so little to push against that they usually gave up and pushed each other instead. "Pipes," said Uncle Vernon, who did not like his dinners interrupted by acoustics. "Settling, house does it, sit down." "It's not pipes," said Dudley with the certainty of the favored. He put his ear to the cupboard door, and Harry, very quietly, in the part of him that had gone still enough to hear the crown, asked it, the way you ask a dog under the table not to bark, to please be small now, be beneath notice, do the trick you did in the hall. And the humming, which Harry could feel in his back teeth, which had been rising in the floor like a kettle, sank all at once to nothing, the way a light goes out, the way a held breath is finally let go, and Dudley straightened up looking cheated. "It's stopped," he said. "Then there's nothing to stop you sitting down," said Aunt Petunia. "Is there? Stop putting your ear on things, you'll catch something." And Dudley, who could be steered like a barge if you got the angle right, was steered back to his chips, and the cupboard kept its secret, and Harry picked his fork back up and finished his 2 fish fingers with his eyes down and his pulse keeping under the table where no one could see, the slow, patient time of the iron beneath the floor. He had asked it for something, and it had done the thing he asked. He turned that over carefully in the place where he kept his coins, and found that he did not know yet whether it was a wonderful thing or a dangerous one, and decided in the meantime that it could be both, because most of the best things were. That night Harry lay in the cupboard under the stairs with the crown out from under the floorboard and beside him on the thin mattress, and he could not sleep, and he was not sorry. The house had gone through its evening like a great animal settling. The television voices, the clink of Uncle Vernon's last drink, the stairs taking Aunt Petunia's weight, then Dudley's heavier weight, then the long groan of the landing and the click of doors and the particular silence of a family asleep, which is different from the silence of a family awake and being quiet at you. When that silence came, Harry sat up in the dark and put both hands on the crown. There was light in it. He had not seen it in the hall, where the windows had been bright. He had not seen it in the car, where the street lamps came and went. But here in the absolute dark of the cupboard, with the coats hanging like sleeping bats and the slatted underside of the stairs a hand's breadth above his face, Harry could see that the writing in the iron, the angular, deep, certain writing that ran all the way round the band, was not black like the rest. It glowed, faintly. The color of a coal that is nearly out and will not go out, the color of the inside of a forge banked for the night, a red so dark it was almost a memory of red, and it pulsed, slow, in time with the hammering in time Harry noticed, with his own slow heart, which had been keeping the crown's time since the church hall, and had apparently decided to go on doing it. He ran his finger along the writing, and the dark red glow brightened where he touched, the way breath brightens a coal, and the hammering came up clear and close as if a door had opened somewhere very far below, and the sound of an enormous workshop had come through it. Harry looked at the writing for a long while, with the particular concentration he gave to things no one had told him he was allowed to understand. He could not read it, he knew that much. The marks were nothing like the letters in the torn cover paperback or the words on the cereal box or the cross-felt tip of Tibbet's sign. They were straight strokes and hard angles, struck not drawn, each one ending in a bitten notch where the writer had finished every stroke by deciding it, and they did not spell anything Harry's eyes could hold. But there is a difference between reading and knowing, and Harry, who had learned a whole language once by being too small to be spoken to in any other, found that if he stopped trying to read the marks and only let them be near him, they began to give up their meaning the way a cold room gives up its chill slowly from the edges in. One stroke meant deep. He could not have said how he knew it, only that the knowledge arrived already certain, the way you know your own name. One meant fire and one meant unbroken, and one, near the joint of the band where the iron had been worked thinnest by some old reverent hand, meant a thing for which Harry had no word in English and would not have one for years, a word that pointed at the place where mine and ours and home all met and became the same word, and that one, when his finger found it, was the warmest of all, and the glow under his fingertips steadied and held like an eye-opening. He sat with that a while. It was a bigger and quieter thing than the cupboard door being yanked open or Uncle Vernon's color going past purple, more like standing at the edge of a well in the dark and being asked a question too large for the person asking it. He decided he was allowed it. The alternative was to put the crown back under the floorboard and pretend, and Harry had a great many faults by the careful daily accounting of number 4, but pretending a true thing was false had never once been among them. Harry, who was 5 and alone and used to being alone and good at it, leaned down close to the iron in the dark and did the thing that no one had done for it in 100 years. He talked to it. I don't know what you are, he whispered. I think you're a crown. I think you belong to someone. I think you've been lost a very long time because you're warm and everything that's been lost a long time should be cold, but you're not. You're keeping yourself warm somehow, the way I keep my feet warm by sitting on them. I do that. I sit on my own feet. He paused. The glow waited. I don't have a someone, Harry told the crown in the dark with great seriousness, getting the worst of it out where only the iron could hear, so I don't really know how it works having one. But I think if I were someone and you got lost, I'd want you back. I'd look for ages, so I think somebody's looking for you, and I think we should let them find you. Because being lost is the worst thing, and you've been it for 100 years, and that's enough. That's enough now. The glow brightened until the whole band of the crown was a ring of dull red fire in the black of the cupboard, and the hammering swelled up around him until it was not under the floor at all, but in the small wooden room with him, filling it, a sound like 1,000 hammers all bringing down at once and then, in the same instant, all going silent together, a single tremendous struck note that he felt in his back teeth and the soles of his feet and the bones behind his eyes. And then it stopped and the glow sank back to its bank-cold patience, and the cupboard was just a cupboard again, dark and small and smelling of polish, but something had heard. Harry did not know it, lying there with his hand on the cooling iron, his eyes already getting heavy now that the worst of it was out, and said, he could not know it. He was 5, and the place where the something lived was very far away and very far down, and the only road between them was the road the hammering had worn, the groove in the world that old Tibbet had spoken of, the channel a lost thing cuts when it minds going home for 100 years. Far below the green skin of England, below the chalk and the clay and the old drowned forests, below the deep cold rivers that no surveyor has mapped, in a hall whose ceiling was lost in its own height and whose floor was paved with the names of the dead, a watcher sat where a watcher had sat in unbroken shifts for longer than the country overhead had been called England. The watcher had a name, but had not used it in so long that it had gone quiet, like Tibbet's grammar, like the third thing Harry would not say. The watcher's single task, handed down hand to hand through a line that did not break, was to listen for one note among all the notes of the deep world, one struck shape, one returning sound, and to have heard it for so many lifetimes without ever hearing it that the listening had become a kind of grief worn smooth, a wound that the nation no longer spoke of because there was nothing left to say. The watcher heard it. The watcher's hand, which was gray and hard and had not trembled in 200 years, came down flat on the cold stone of the listening table, not because the sight unmade it, for nothing had unmade the watcher in 200 years, but in the absolute stillness of a creature that has waited so long for a thing that the thing's arrival is almost more than the waiting was. Far down the hall, where the sole fire of the nation burned banked and low in a brazier no living wizard had ever seen, a single coal cracked and flared and threw up one bright tongue of flame. Gold shot through with the old deep red and held it and did not let it die. And in a workshop deeper still, where the Forgemasters slept their iron sleep with their hammers laid across their breasts the way kings are laid with their swords, the eldest of them opened both eyes at once in the dark and lay listening, and felt across the bones of the earth a small warm patient voice, the voice of something that had been lost so long it had forgotten the shape of home, saying to the crown of his fathers with a child's terrible and undeserved kindness, "That's enough now. That's enough." The Forgemaster lay still in the dark for a long time. He was old enough to distrust good news, and the nation he served was older than its distrust. He thought of the long uncrowned centuries, the people laboring under the earth with no king iron to anchor them, the Forgemasters keeping the soul fire lit out of pure stubbornness, tending a wound that had gone past hurting into something colder and more patient, a vigil kept not in hope, for hope had died generations back, but because to let the fire go out would have been to agree that the theft had won. They had never once agreed. And now up the worn groove that the lost crown had cut by minding home, there had come the sound the watcher had listened for since before the chalk hills had a name, and threaded through it, impossibly, a wizard child's voice, warm as banked coals, telling the crown of his fathers, "That's enough now." The Forgemaster had outlived hope. He found that hope had not entirely outlived him. Then he reached out one gray hand and took up his hammer and got to his feet and went to wake the nation. He struck the wall of his chamber once, and the blow ran out through the living stone, and in the next chamber a Forgemaster woke and struck her wall, and beyond her a third, so that the waking went out from him in a widening ring of single hammer blows down the galleries and the long forge roads, and behind it the soul fire that had burned banked and low for 300 years climbed up its brazier rib by rib, until the great low hall stood full of a light it had forgotten it could hold. Up in the cupboard under the stairs, Harry Potter slept, with one hand resting on a warm black crown, and dreamed of fire that did not burn and a great kind voice asking him a question he could not quite hear, and a door very far down beginning to open. He woke to Aunt Petunia's fist on the cupboard door and the smell of frying and the ordinary machinery of his ordinary unwanted life starting up again around him. The crown was still warm. He was not somehow as alone as he had been the day before. He pulled the iron deeper under the thin blanket where no one would find it and put his hand flat on the band, and felt it answer against his palm, here, 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 and Harry smiled in the dark where no one could see, and got up to make the breakfast he was not allowed to eat. Chapter 1 End Chapter 2 The Seeker at the window. Doric had been sent up into the wizard world to die, and he knew it, and he intended to be insufferable about it for as long as he lasted. That was not how the director had phrased it, of course. The director had phrased it as an honor. The waking strike had come down through the deep galleries 3 nights running, and the soul fire had flared and held, and the old Forgemaster had walked out of his iron sleep for the first time in 100 years and spoken a single sentence to the assembled keepers of the nation, which was, "The crown has been found, and it is in the hands of a child, and the child has asked the crown to be allowed to give it home." And the hall had gone so quiet that Doric, near the back where the young and the expendable stood, had heard the soul fire eating its own coals, because it was not possible. Because in 3 centuries of listening they had heard the crown move exactly twice, both times being carried further off by some wizard who had bought it or stolen it or won it at cards, and never once, not in the whole long defeat, had they heard it asked to come home. So they needed someone to go up and look. Someone clever enough to find a single house in the gray sprawl of the upper world, and quick enough to run if it was a trap, and young enough that the nation could afford to lose him if it was. Doric qualified on all 3 counts, the third most of all, and he had said so to the director's face, which was the sort of thing that got a goblin sent up into the wizard world to die. He came up through the old watercourses under Surrey on the 2nd night, because the deep roads ran where the deep water ran, and he came out through a storm drain into a country that offended him in every particular. It was so soft. That was Doric's first and lasting judgment on the upper world, delivered silently with feeling as he stood dripping in the mouth of the drain and looked out at Privet Drive. Everything was soft and the same. The houses were soft, made of brick that had never been asked to hold up a mountain and would have wept if you'd asked it. The grass was soft and cut to uniform stupidity. The light was soft, orange, falling from poles in a way that pretended at the warmth of fire and delivered none of it. There was not one straight true line in the whole street that a maker had drawn on purpose. There were only the lazy approximate lines of folk who built to keep the rain off and never once in the building asked the stone what it wanted to be. Doric had been raised in halls where the angle of a stair was an argument 3 generations deep. He looked at Privet Drive and something rose in him that was 9/10 the plain missing of his own deep halls, and he let it because it traveled lighter than fear and he had a long way to go. He did not need a map, he had the resonance. Every goblin can feel worked iron the way a person feels the sun on the back of his neck without looking, knowing only that it is there and where. The crown was not iron the way a nail is iron. The crown was the first iron, the root note, the sound that all the nation's other work was tuned against, and Doric had been hearing it grow louder in his back teeth for 2 days, and now, standing in the drain mouth, it was so loud and so close that he marveled the soft sleeping wizards in their soft sleeping houses did not sit bolt upright in their beds and demand to know what was singing under their street. It came from the 4th house along. It came specifically and absurdly from a low square window at the foot of that house, half below the level of the soft grass, the kind of window that lights a cellar or a cupboard, the smallest and meanest aperture in the entire structure. Of course, thought Doric, of course that is where they have put the crown of Ragnarok, in the smallest, meanest hole in the house. He did not yet understand why the thought made him want to break something, and he would not understand it until he had seen what else they kept in that hole. He crossed the soft grass without bending a blade of it, because a goblin who cannot walk on the upper world without leaving sign is a goblin who does not come back from the upper world, and he crouched at the low window and looked in, and he met 2 eyes that were already open and already looking back at him. For a moment neither of them moved. The child was small even by the standard of children, which Doric knew chiefly from having been warned about them. He had expected a wizard whelp to be plump and pink and loud, and this one was none of those. It was thin in a way that Doric recognized, because the nation had its own thin ones, the orphan forged, the ones who came up hungry, and a hungry child has a particular stillness that a fed one never learns. It lay on a thin mattress on the floor of the cupboard with a blanket too small for it, and on the mattress beside it, glowing faintly bank coal red, certain as a struck plumb line, lay the crown of Ragnarok, which 300 years and the whole nation's grief had not been able to find, in which this thin still child had one hand resting on, the way you rest a hand on a sleeping dog so it knows you have not gone. The child looked at Doric. Doric looked at the child. The crown glowed between them. Doric had prepared a number of things to do at this moment, all of them involving speed, and he found he was doing none of them because the child was not screaming. Wizards screamed. That was the entire content of the briefings. They would scream, and then they would fetch iron of their own, the little carved sticks that threw curses, and a seeker's whole art was to be gone before the screaming finished. This child had a goblin's face at its window in the dead of night and was not screaming. It was studying him with a frank and unhurried attention, the attention of someone deciding a thing carefully, and then it did something that broke every line of every briefing Doric had ever sat through. It lifted the latch and opened the window so that the only barrier between a goblin of the nation and a sleeping wizard household was now nothing at all. "You came," the child whispered. "I told it somebody would come. I told it for 3 nights. It didn't believe me at first, I could tell. But I said somebody's looking for you, somebody good, and they'll come, and you came." It paused and tilted its head and added with the scrupulous honesty of the very young, "You're not a person, are you? You're something else, that's all right. I just want to be sure I've got it right, because if I tell you the wrong thing about yourself, you might think I'm stupid, and I'm not, I'm only little, which is different." Doric, who had come up into the wizard world to die, and who had a number of cutting things prepared for any wizard he met on the way, discovered that he had nothing prepared for this at all. "No," he said, against every instinct of his training, "I'm not a person, not the way you mean it." His voice came out rougher than he wanted because he had not used it for 2 days, and because the question had been asked without one grain of disgust in it, which no wizard had ever managed in the whole history of the nation's dealings with them. "I'm a goblin, we made that." He nodded at the crown, and the nodding cost him something, because to point at the crown of Ragnarok with his bare hand in a wizard's cupboard was a kind of blasphemy, and to do it gently to a child was a stranger kind still. "We made that a long time ago, before your folk had a word for us, and then your folk took it." "I know," said the child. Doric went still in the particular way of a creature that has just heard a sound it cannot place. "You know what? That somebody took it." The child sat up, careful not to lift its hand off the crown, so that it ended in an awkward folded posture, loyal to the iron even in the middle of the night. "A man told me, at the jumble. He said it wasn't man work, he said it was made by underground folk and they lost it long ago and never stopped being sure it was theirs. And then I held it and it was warm, and everything that's lost is supposed to be cold, so I knew it was still trying. And then it showed me words I can't read, but I know what they mean anyway, and one of them means the place where mine and ours and home are all the same word." The child looked at Doric with enormous seriousness. "I haven't got that word. In my language, we don't have it. I think that's a thing wrong with my language." In the deep halls, where Doric had been young, there was a saying that the iron does not lie, and neither does a child too small to know the profit in it. He had always taken it for the kind of thing the old ones said. He crouched at the window of number 4 Privet Drive in the soft offensive orange light, and he felt the saying turn over in his chest and become true, and he did not enjoy it because true things ask things of you, and Doric had come up here to keep his head down and run. "What's your name?" he said. "Harry," a small frown. "Harry Potter, sometimes just boy. What's yours? Do goblins have names? You don't have to tell me if it's private." "The crown's got names all round the edge, but they're private, I think. I can feel that they're private, so I don't say them out loud even though I sort of know them now." "Doric," he said. He had not meant to give it. A seeker gave nothing in the upper world, least of all a name, because a name was a handle, and a handle was a way to be picked up and carried off. He gave it anyway. "We have names, privater ones than that we don't give. Doric's the one you can have." He found he was scowling, which came almost as a comfort, because scowling at least was familiar. "And the ones on the crown aren't only private, child. They're the dead and the not yet born. The first maker wrote the whole line into the band so the chain would never break, every goblin who was and every goblin who will be, so that a goblin standing in the dark could put his hand to it and know he came from somewhere. That's what your folk took, not a hat, a people's certainty that it goes on." Harry absorbed this the way the very young absorb the truly large things, without flinching, because they have not yet learned how much it ought to cost. "That's the worst thing I ever heard," he said, taking that's worse than anything Dudley does, and Dudley once shut a smaller boy's hand in a gate on purpose. He looked down at the crown, and his hand on it tightened, not to keep it, but to apologize to it, which Doric saw and would remember the rest of his long life. "Then you have to have it back, obviously." "It's yours, it was always yours. I worked that out in the church hall, and I've known it ever since." He looked up. "How do I give it to you? Do I just hand it through the window? Is that allowed? I don't want to do it wrong. It's been waiting 100 years. It would be terrible to do the last bit wrong." And there it was, the moment the whole nation had stopped believing in. Doric had been told what to watch for. The director had been precise about it. In the cold way the director was precise about everything, because the director had spent his life across a counter from wizards and had no illusions left to lose. "They will want a price," the director had said. "They always want a price. This one is a child, and so the price may be small and strange, a sweet, a toy, a promise, but there will be a price. Because a wizard does not understand that a made thing has an owner the way a wizard does not understand that the moon has a far side. He has simply never been on the right part of himself to see it. Find out the price. Whatever it is, do not agree to it, do not refuse it, bring it back to me, and we will decide as a nation what the crown of Ragnarok is worth. And Doric, listen to me. It is worth more than anything they will ask, and we will pay it anyway, and we will hate them for the rest of time for making us, as we have hated them for the rest of time already." Doric crouched at the window and waited for the price. "I just hand it through," he said carefully, testing, laying the trap the director would have laid, "but it can't go that simple. There's law. A made thing of the nation, lost and found, can only come home one way. The finder has to give it back himself with his own 2 hands at the forge where it was made, in front of the Forgemasters, freely, freely, child, with nothing asked in return and nothing taken. He watched the small face for the calculation he had been promised would come, the flicker of a creature working out its leverage. So if you wanted a price for it, here's where you'd say so. You found it, by your folks' law, findings 9/10 of keeping. You could ask the nation for near enough anything and we'd be bound to weigh it. Gold, we have gold the way your street has grass, or a wish made true, or an enemy made sorry. You said there's a Dudley, we could make him very sorry. He should not have offered the last one, it was not in the script. He offered it because the cupboard was very small and the blanket was very thin and the child was very hungry, and somewhere under all that practiced hardness Doric had begun, against orders, to take a side. Harry thought about it. He genuinely thought about it. Doric watched him do it, watched the offer go in and get turned over honestly, because Harry was not a saint. Harry was a 5-year-old who slept on a floor, and the idea of Dudley being made very sorry was not without its attractions. Doric saw the attraction arrive. He saw it considered. And then he saw the child set it down gently as he set down everything that was not the thing that mattered, and Doric understood that he was watching something he would have to find words for later, for the director, for the Forgemasters, for the whole waiting nation, and that he did not have the words yet and might never have them. "No," said Harry. "Thank you. That's kind, the Dudley thing, that's a really kind offer, and I want you to know I noticed it was kind." He said it earnestly, an accountant of kindnesses, a child who had received so few that he logged each one. "But no, because if I take something for giving it back, then I didn't give it back, did I? I sold it back. And it's not mine to sell, it was never mine, so selling it would be like selling something out of someone else's house and saying it's all right because I found it on their step." He shook his head. "And anyway, you don't get a reward for stopping doing a bad thing. Keeping it would be the bad thing, so giving it back is just stopping. You don't get gold for stopping." He paused, and then, because he was honest to the bone, he added the rest of it, the part that was not noble at all, the part that was just true. "And I think if I tried to keep it now, I'd be sad forever. It would be like that boy's hand in the gate, except I'd be the gate. I don't want to be the gate." Doric did not say anything for a while. He had come up into the wizard world to die, and he had been insufferable about it, and somewhere in the last few minutes the dying had stopped being the point. He looked at the thin child loyal to the iron in the smallest hole in the house, refusing gold he had every right to take, refusing it not from grand virtue but from a plain refusal to become the thing that had hurt him, and Doric thought, with the clean cold clarity that came to his people at the anvil when the work finally rang true, the director is wrong, not about wizards, about this one. This one is not a wizard the way the others are wizards. This one is something the nation has no word for either, and we are about to find out what. "All right," he said, and his rough voice had gone quiet. "All right, Harry Potter, no price. I heard you say it, and the iron heard you say it, and the iron does not forget what it hears. You'll give it back the right way with your own hands at the forge for nothing." He shifted his weight, all business now, because feeling was dangerous and a plan was safe, "which means you have to come down to us under. It can't be carried by anyone but the finder, that's the law, so I can't take it for you even if I wanted to, and I'll be honest, I do want to. I've wanted to hold it since I was a hatchling, and I'll be wanting to my whole life, and I'll never do it, because it isn't mine to hold either. It's no one's to hold, it's the nation's to stand under. That's the difference, and your folk have never once understood it." "Under," Harry repeated. He looked for the first time a little daunted, not by the goblin and not by the law, but by the simple logistics, which were the logistics of a 5-year-old who was not allowed to the corner shop on his own. "I'm not allowed out, they lock the cupboard sometimes, and I'm little, I don't know the way to anywhere, I've only ever been where the car takes me." A new thought crossed his face, sharper than the others. "And if I go and they notice I'm gone, when I come back it'll be very bad, worse than the gate. They want to know where, and I can't tell them where, and not telling them is its own thing that's bad." "They won't notice," said Doric. "That's the one mercy in the whole business, and it's a goblin mercy, which means it's a trick. We have a craft for not being noticed. The Crown's been doing a baby version of it for you already, hasn't it? Going quiet when the fat one put his ear to the door." Harry's eyes widened because he had not told Doric that, and Doric permitted himself the first thin pleasure of the night, the pleasure of a creature who likes to be ahead. "The deep roads run under your street. I came up one. We can walk to the forge and back and leave a durhammer on this house so heavy that your soft family will go 3 days swearing nothing's wrong and never once think to open the cupboard, because the cupboard will sit just below the edge of their seeing, the way it always has, the way you've lived your whole life, child, just below the edge of their seeing." He had not meant to say that last part either. It kept happening tonight. "You're good at being unseen, so's the Crown, you'll travel well together." Harry was quiet. Then he said in a voice that had gone very small and very careful, the voice of someone asking a question whose answer matters more than they want to show, "Will I have to come back here after, or can I?" He stopped. He had been trained, more thoroughly than Doric had been trained, to seek, never to ask for anything, because asking was how you found out you couldn't have it. He did not finish the question. Doric, who had been refusing all night to take a side, took it all the way. "Let's get the crown home first," he said, not unkindly. "That's the bit with the law on it. After is a different country, and we'll map it when we're standing in it. But I'll tell you this for nothing, Harry Potter, since we're trading in nothings tonight." He reached out one gray hand slow, so the child could refuse it, and when the child did not refuse it, he closed it around Harry's thin one, goblin to wizard, hand to hand, the oldest and most broken treaty in the world made new for one moment at a cupboard window. A people that has spent 300 years grieving over one lost thing is a people that knows the worth of a found one. Whatever you are, you found us. Remember you said you've got no someone. You might want to check that sum again after. Harry did not let go of his hand. He held it and looked up at the goblin's hard gray face in the orange dark and asked the question that a child asks, which is the question under all the other questions. "What's it like where you live?" Doric nearly told him there was no time. There was no time. The watcher sat across the road and the night was burning. But the child had refused gold and left his last sweet in a hole in the floor, and there are debts a goblin pays even when the building is falling, and so Doric told him, fast and low, the way you tell a thing you have not let yourself love out loud in a long while. "It's deep," he said, "deeper than your folk have ever dug, and your folk dig for nothing but money. We're below the money. We're below the bones of the kings your histories brag about. There are halls down there with ceilings you can't see the top of, and rivers that run hot and rivers that run cold and one that runs bright, actually bright, light pouring along it like water, and we built the whole of it ourselves, every stair, every arch, hammered out of the dark by hands that had nothing handed to them. And in the deepest part there's the forge where the first of us struck the first true thing, and the fire in it has never gone out, not once, not in all the centuries your folk were taking everything else from us. We kept the fire. They could take the crown, but they couldn't take the fire, because the fire isn't a thing you can carry off. It's a thing you have to tend every hour forever, and your folk have never tended anything in their lives." He stopped, surprised at himself. "It's home. That's what it's like. You ask me the word you haven't got. That's the word. I've just spent it all on you." "Who took it?" Harry asked. "The crown. You keep saying my folk, but it wasn't all of them. It was one of them, wasn't it? Somebody did it. Somebody with a name." It was, Doric thought, a frighteningly exact question for a creature that small. "Somebody with a name," he agreed. "A wizard lord generations back in the bad years, when your ministry first decided we were beasts to be managed and not folk to be dealt with. He came down under a flag of bargaining, and he went up with the crown under his cloak, and his line has kept it or sold it or hidden it ever since, and grown fat telling each other it was theirs by right of having it. The nation knows the name. We have carried it the way you carry a stone in your shoe for 100 miles, because to say it before we had the crown back would have been to blow on a coal we couldn't yet use." He shook his head. "I'll not say it to you in the dark of an enemy street, but you'll hear it, child, before this is done. The folk who took the crown are not going to be glad you're giving it back. Bear that. The right thing has enemies. That's how you know it's the right one and not just the easy one wearing its coat." Harry took this in and nodded slowly, confirming to himself something he had already begun to suspect about the shape of the world. "Things that are good for you have enemies," he said, trying the idea on. "Like vegetables." Doric looked at him. "All right," he conceded after a moment. "Not exactly like vegetables, but you're not wrong, which is worse." Then Doric felt the other thing, and his hand tightened on Harry's before he could stop it. It was a small wrongness, the kind a creature only notices because it has spent its life in a place where every line is true and every wrongness therefore shouts. Out in the soft orange street at the edge of the resonance, something was listening that was not him. He could not see it. That was what told him it was there. The night had a hole in it, a patch where the crown's song went and did not come back, the way a stone in a stream makes a smooth place that proves the stone. Someone or something had thrown a quiet over a parked stretch of Privet Drive, a wizard's quiet, oilier than a goblin's and less honest, and was sitting inside it, and had been sitting inside it, Doric understood with a cold settling in his gut, for longer than Doric had been here. Since before him, since the crown first cried out 3 nights ago and put its struck note into the whole listening world. "Harry," he said, very low, not moving his mouth much, "when the crown woke up the other night. When you told it that's enough, how loud do you think you were?" "I whispered," said Harry. "I always whisper, you learn to. Not your mouth, child, the other thing, the thing that went out of it like a bell." Doric kept his eyes on the dark, smooth place across the road and did not let them sharpen, because a watcher feels a watcher the way a goblin feels iron. "You rang a note that my whole nation has been listening 300 years to hear. We are very good at listening, and we are not the only ones who have been doing it. Somewhere there are folk who have wanted that crown for 300 years too, only they didn't want to give it back. They wanted to own it. Folk like that keep their ears open the same as we do. And one of them is sitting across your street right now, in a quiet they made, watching this house, and has been since before I came." He felt Harry go still under his hand, not the frozen stillness of a hunted thing, but the gathering stillness of a clever one. "Then we have to be faster than them," Harry said, "and quieter and cleverer." A pause. "I'm good at all 3, I had to be." "I'm starting to believe you," said Doric. He did the calculation a seeker does, the one that is all the seeker's art compressed into a breath. To go out the front, into the street, into the smooth quiet where the watcher sat, with the crown of Ragnarok uncovered and singing, was to hand 3 centuries of grief to whoever had been patient enough to wait across the road in the dark. But the deep road did not open onto the street. It opened from the storm drain, which lay behind the house, on the far side from the watcher, beyond the soft, stupid fence. If they could get the crown out of the cupboard and across the back garden under a heavy enough durhammer, the watcher in the front would feel the song dim and finally gutter, and would think, please all the iron in the deep, would think that the crown had merely gone quiet again, the way it had gone quiet 100 times in 100 years. Here's the plan, and it's a goblin plan, so it's mostly nerve, Doric said. You bring the crown. You're the only one who can carry it and the only one it'll let go small for. I've watched it do that for you, and it wouldn't do it for me. I'll lay a quiet on you both, heavier than anything that's ever been on this house, heavy enough that your family sleeps through the last trump. We go out the back, low, slow, no straight lines, to the drain. And the whole time, Harry, you keep the crown thinking about going home, because a crown that's thinking about going home is a crown that wants to be quiet, and a crown that wants a thing helps you do it. You've done it already. Do it again the whole way and don't stop, not for anything, not if the sky falls. What about my things? Harry asked, and Doric almost laughed, because of course a child would ask, and then he saw what the things were and did not laugh. Harry had lifted the loose floorboard. Underneath, in the cold cavity, lay the entire material wealth of Harry Potter, age 5. A marble with a galaxy turning inside it, a brass key that opened nothing, a paperback with no cover, and a single boiled sweet, gone soft and gray in its twist of paper, that he had been saving so long he had forgotten what occasion he was saving it for. Doric looked at the hoard of a child who owned nothing, laid out neat and loved in a hole in the floor, and the thing that rose in him then was not the old hardness and was not the missing of home, and was, he would decide much later, the first clean anger of his life that belonged entirely to him and not to his nation. Bring the marble, he said gruffly. Leave the rest. We'll get you better. We'll get you the best there is. We make the best there is. He had no authority to promise it. He promised it anyway, the second promise of the night he had no right to make, and he meant it harder than the first. Harry put the marble in his pocket. Then he picked up the soft gray sweet in its twist of paper and held it out through the window to Doric on his open palm, the whole of his emergency, the thing he had saved so long he had forgotten what for. You came a long way, Harry said, as if this explained it, which to him it did. You're supposed to give a guest something. We never have anything, but I've got this. You can have it. It's gone a bit soft, but it's still nice if you suck it slow. Doric looked at the sweet on the thin palm for what felt to him like a long time and was in truth about 2 seconds, which was all the time the night could spare, and all the time he needed to understand that he was being offered by a starving child that child's single hoarded comfort freely, with nothing wanted back, for the second time in one night. He had been raised to take nothing from wizards and to trust nothing they gave. He found that the rule had a hole in it exactly the shape of this, and that he had walked through the hole some minutes ago and was not going back. Keep it, he said, and his voice did something it had not done in years. A guest can decline. That's law too, the oldest hospitality you offer, and I'm honored, and I say keep your strength, host, you'll need it on the road. But Harry, he made himself meet the child's eyes. I'll not forget you held it out, the iron heard that one too. Harry looked at the sweet, and then, because waste was a sin in his small economy, he put it carefully back in its hole under the floor, leaving it for a version of himself that might come back hungry, and that was its own small severance, the giving up of an emergency he had carried so long it had become a friend. He picked up the crown in both hands. It went light for him at once, light and quiet, and the bank coal glow in the band steadied as if it understood that the work tonight was the work it had waited 100 years to do, the last hard yard of a 100-year road. I'm ready, Harry whispered. I've been ready for ages, I just didn't know what for. Doric laid the quiet on them. He had been bred and trained to it, and even so it was the hardest craft he had ever worked, because he was not only hiding 2 bodies, he was hiding the loudest object in the upper world, and he had to do it without smothering the crown's own want, the way you bank a fire without putting it out. He felt the durhammer settle over the cupboard, over the child, over the iron, a great soft gray muffling, and he felt the crown's song fold down small and patient inside it, still burning, still singing, but inward now, a secret kept between the 3 of them, and across the road in the smooth, quiet place, Doric felt the watcher's attention waver like a hound that has lost a scent on wet ground and lifts its head uncertain and casts about. Now, Doric breathed, low, slow, home in your hands. They went out the back into the night under the quiet, a goblin and a wizard child in the soul of a nation, across a soft suburban lawn that did not know what was crossing it. Halfway over it the quiet nearly broke. It was nobody's fault, and it was the crown's doing and Doric's both. They passed beneath the soft sleeping window of the front room, closer to the street than Doric wanted, and through it, across the dark house, Harry could see the faint orange wash of the street lamp on the far wall, and for half a heartbeat he forgot the instruction and let himself wonder, the way a tired child wonders, what would happen to the Dursleys when they woke. Just for that half a heartbeat the Crown was not thinking about going home. It was thinking through Harry about the house, about staying, about the small bitter pull of the only place he had ever been kept, and the Durammer thinned over that thought like ice over a warm spring, and the Crown's song welled up bright and sudden into the gap. Across the road, in the smooth, quiet place, the Watcher's head came up. Doric felt it like a blade laid flat against his neck. He did not turn, he did not run. He put his mouth to the child's ear and said one word, "Home," soft as the closing of an eye, and Harry caught himself and bore down and put the whole of his small, fierce attention back onto the one true thing, the road down, the forge, the giving back, the end of the 100-year lostness. And the Crown heard him choose it and folded its song back down into the quiet so fast and so deep that the welling up, to a listener across a road, might have been a sleeper turning over, a cat on a wall. A trick of a long, cold watch. The Watcher's attention hung in the dark a moment longer, a held breath of malice over the sleeping street. Then grudgingly it settled back into its waiting, and the blade came off Doric's neck, and he found he had been standing dead still in the middle of a lawn for the length of 3 slow hammer blows of his own heart, with a wizard child and a stolen kingdom in his care. "Don't wonder," he breathed, moving again, low and quick. "Not till we're under. Wondering's loud. You can wonder all you like once there's a mile of stone over us. Down there, wondering's the one thing nobody will ever stop you doing again." The fence was an indignity Doric solved by simply going up it and over and reaching back down for the Crown and then for the child, and Harry came up the fence one-handed with the Crown clutched to his chest in the other arm, the way only the very small and the very determined can climb, and dropped down on the far side into the weeds at the edge of the made world, where the mown grass gave out and the real dirt began. The storm drain breathed at them out of the dark, cold and iron-smelling, and going down. Harry stopped at the lip of it. Behind him, a few yards and a whole life away, the soft orange street slept on under its borrowed light, and somewhere in it a patient enemy had not yet realized that the thing it had waited 3 centuries for had just walked out the back door in the arms of a 5-year-old. Ahead of him, under the lid of the world, a road he could not see ran down to a place he could not imagine, to a forge older than the country over it, to folk who made the best there is, to the answer to a question he had not been allowed to finish asking. "It's very dark," Harry said, looking down into it. It was not a complaint. He was a truthful child, and it was very dark, and he was 5, and he said the true thing. "It is," said Doric. "It's the dark my whole people live in. We light it ourselves." "That's the whole story of us, child, if you want it in one breath. Nobody gave us light, so we learned to make our own, and then your folk came and took the brightest thing we ever made, and we kept the dark and the making both, and we waited." He stepped down onto the first stone of the deep road and held up his hand, the broken treaty offered again. "You don't have to come. You could put the Crown in my arms and let the law be hanged and go back to your cupboard and your soft sleeping family and never see a goblin again, and no one in the upper world would ever know what you nearly were. That's a real door. I'm showing it to you on purpose, because a thing chosen with the other door shut isn't chosen at all, and you of all the children in the world should get to choose one thing freely." Harry looked back at the house once. Then he took Doric's hand and shifted the warm crown against his chest where it sang its banked and secret song, and stepped down off the edge of the only world he had ever been given into the dark that the goblins had learned to light, and the deep road took the sound of his small feet and carried it down, and down, and down, toward the forge. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The deep road the storm drain told one lie, which was that it was a storm drain, and after that it told no lies at all, because it stopped being a storm drain about 40 feet down and became something else, and the something else was honest the way only old-made things are honest. Harry felt the change before he saw it. The concrete pipe, slick and round and stinking of the upper world's rain, gave way under his feet to cut stone, and the cut stone was not like any stone he had walked on. Every block of it had been set by a hand that cared. He could not have said how he knew. He knew as he had known the runes on the crown meant deep and fire and unbroken. The knowledge arrived already certain. The steps went down in a long curve, each one the exact rise of the last, worn in the middle into a shallow trough by feet over a span of time his mind slid off of. And along the wall at the height of Harry's shoulder ran a groove, finger-deep, that he put his hand into and found fit his hand as though it had been cut for him. Except that it had been cut, Doric told him before England, for goblins coming up and down in the dark to keep one true line under their fingers so they would never be lost. "You're never lost on the deep road if you keep a hand on the line," Doric said. His voice came back different down here, fuller, the stone giving it room. "That's the first thing a hatchling learns, before walking almost. Keep a hand on the true line and the dark can't have you. Your folk go into the dark and panic and run, and the dark eats them. We go into the dark and put a hand on the line and walk, and we come out the other side with a kingdom built behind us. Same dark, different folk." "It's a good idea," said Harry with the warm approval of a connoisseur of good ideas, keeping his hand in the groove. Whoever thought of it was clever, he considered. Did they get a reward for thinking of it? They got to not be lost, said Doric. We don't reward sense down here. Reward sense by letting it keep us alive, and that's reward enough, and a goblin who wanted more than that for being sensible would be told to go up and try the wizards. They pay extra for it up there and call it being clever. He glanced back, and the bank-cold glow of the crown lit his hard face from below and made it stranger and older. You'd not last a week as a wizard, Harry Potter. You keep doing sums where the answer comes out kindness. They'd skin you. The stairs went down a long time. Harry's legs began to ache and then stopped reporting it, the way legs do, and he walked on the ache as he had learned to walk on hunger, and he did not complain, because complaining was loud, and Doric had said wondering was loud, and Harry reasoned that complaining was probably louder, being wondering's unhappy cousin. He kept the crown against his chest. It had grown no lighter, but he had grown used to the weight, so that it began to feel less like a burden he carried and more like a thing that was simply attached to him now, a second heart worn on the outside, beating its slow, patient one and one and one. And then the stair turned a last time around a great pier of living rock, and the wall on Harry's left hand fell away into nothing, and Harry stopped because the dark had opened. It had opened the way the sky opens when you come out of a wood, except downward, and except that the sky was on fire in a way the sky never is. Harry stood on a ledge on the wall of a chasm so vast that the far side of it was a rumor, a darker dark with lights on it, and down the center of the chasm, very far below, ran a river, and the river was bright, not lit. Bright of itself, a torrent of pouring light the color of the inside of the crown's glow, gold gone deep into red, light moving like water because it was being carried by water, some deep hot vein of the world that the goblins had cut down to and let run through the heart of their kingdom so that the dark would have a sun. By the light of the bright river Harry could see the kingdom climbing the chasm walls on every side. Galleries and arches and stairs and bridges without number, balconies cut straight from the cliff, doorways high as churches, whole streets of them stacked one above another up into a height that smoked with its own distance, and over all of it, faint and constant and felt as much as heard, the sound Harry had first caught in a church hall through a carpet tile, the sound of hammers, 10,000 of them, the nation at its everlasting work. The song the crown had been singing alone in the dark for 100 years and was now at last singing toward. Harry looked at it for a long while and did not say anything, because there are sights that take all of a person's words at once and leave him only the looking. That's the Underforge of Britain, Doric said beside him quietly, and there was something in his voice that had not been there up in the soft street, a straightening, a coming home. Not the deepest hall and not the grandest, that's away east under the old mountains, but it's ours, it's mine. I was struck and named in a forge you can't see from here, and I'll be laid out in one when my work's done. Folk are born in that, Harry, live their whole lives in it and never go up top and never want to. Your folk think we're a counter and a vault and a sneer behind a grill at your bank. That's the one window we let them look through. This is the house behind the window. The most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Harry said. The crown pulsed against his chest, bright and quick, and Harry understood without being told that it was glad that 100 years of holding open a fire door in the cold upper dark was being answered, stair by stair, by the sight of home coming up to meet it. It's glad, he told Doric. The crown, it can see, it knows where it is now. It hasn't seen this in 100 years, and it can see it now, and it's so glad it's making my chest hurt. Doric looked at the child and at the iron the child carried, and the hardness of his face did a thing it was not built for. Then let's not keep it waiting the last mile, he said gruffly, after 100 years, and he started down, and Harry went after him, one hand on the true line, the bright river burning far below, down into the house behind the window. The lower they went, the more the kingdom stopped being a view and started being a place. The galleries that had been distant lights became real, became doorways and windows with the warm orange of forge fire behind them, became here and there a face that looked out as they passed and went still at the sight of the crown glow in a child's arms and did not call out, only watched, and pressed a hand flat to its own chest in a gesture Harry did not know and felt the meaning of anyway. Word was running ahead of them down the stairs faster than feet could carry it. The crown was singing and the nation was hearing, and the dark was filling gallery by gallery, with goblins come silently to the rails of their own homes to see a thing none of them had believed they would live to see. Harry's legs gave out on a wide landing where the bright river ran close below, near enough that its heat dried the cold sweat on him, and Doric let him sit, just for a breath, on a stone bench worn smooth by 100 generations of resting feet. That fire, Harry said, looking down at the river of light, too tired now to be careful with his wonder. Is it the same as the fire in your forge? It looks like the inside of the crown. It's the same fire, Doric said. He sat beside the child, watching the rails fill above and below them the silent gathering nation. All of it's the same fire, child. The river, the forge, the glow, and the band you're carrying. There's a heat that lives in the deep of the world, the heat the world was made hot with, and your folk dig past it chasing coal and gold and never once kneel down and ask it what it is. We dug down and we found it and we knelt. We didn't take it. You can't take it. You can only tend it. So we tend it and it lights our dark and it softens our iron, and the first of us put a drop of it into the crown, so the nation would carry a piece of the world's own heart wherever it stood. He glanced sideways at Harry. You felt it, be glad, you said. That's why. It's been 100 years up in the cold with a coat of dust on it, carrying a spark of the deepest fire there is, and now it can hear the fire it came from roaring up to meet it. Wouldn't you be glad, after 100 years in a cupboard, wouldn't you? Harry, who had spent his whole life in a cupboard, put his hand flat on the warm band and did not answer, because some questions are kinder unanswered, and Doric, who had not meant it the way it landed, let him be. They walked a long road along the chasm wall, and because it was long, and because Harry asked, Doric talked, and because Doric talked, Harry learned the thing that the whole upper world had spent 1,000 years refusing to learn. Here's the root of it, Doric said, and once you've got the root, you've got the whole tree, and once you've got the tree, you'll understand why your folk and my folk have hated each other since the first treaty, and why it was never going to be any other way until something happened that everyone agreed couldn't. When a goblin makes a thing, the thing is his, not because he paid for the iron, because he put himself into it. The making is the owning. Blade I forge is mine the way my hand is mine, and if I give it to you, I have lent you the use of it for your life as a courtesy, host to guest, but it comes home to my people when you die because it was never anything but ours. That's the law under all our other laws. That's the law the crown is the king of. Harry walked and thought about this, his hand on the true line, the bright river muttering far below. But you sell things, he said, at the bank. You make money things and people pay and keep them. Don't you? We do, Doric said, and his voice went flat and old. We sell the use. Your folk here sell and think own, because in your tongue they're the same word, and we let you think it, because the alternative was war, and we have lost every war. So we sell you the use of our work, and we smile behind the grill, and we wait, and when you die we take it back through 100 quiet clauses your lawyers never read, and you call us cheats. We are not cheats. We are the only honest dealers your world has ever had. We have simply never once agreed that a thing stops being its maker's because a man with a purse walked off with it. He stopped on the road and turned, and the crown light caught his eyes. Now, hold that in your 2 hands, Harry Potter, and look at the thing you're carrying and tell me what was done to us. Harry looked down at the crown. He thought about the word he didn't have, the one that meant mine and ours and home all at once. He thought about the band full of the names of the dead and the not yet born, the whole nation's certainty that it goes on, made by a hand that had put itself into the iron so completely that the iron was the maker and the maker was the nation. Somebody took your hand, Harry said slowly. That's what it's like, isn't it? Not a hat, a hand. Somebody took your whole people's hand and walked off with it and said it was theirs because they were holding it, and you've been 100 years, 300 years, reaching for a hand that isn't there. His face did something Doric would not forget. That's why it has to be given back and not just taken. Because if you took it back, you'd be doing the holding means owning thing, the wizard thing, and then you'd be a bit like them. But if I give it with my own hands for nothing, then it's not the holding that did it. It's the giving, and giving is the opposite. Giving is the unwizard thing. Doric did not answer for a moment. When he did, his voice had gone rough again. There are scholars of our law, he said, old ones who have studied it for 200 years, who could not have said that as clean as you just said it, and you're 5 and you worked it out carrying it down a stair. He shook his head once hard like a creature shaking off water. I don't know what you are, I keep saying it. I'm going to keep saying it till someone wiser than me tells me, and I don't think anyone wiser than me is going to know either. That was the moment the deep road tried to kill them. Harry never saw where it came from. One stride he was walking and listening and full of the largest idea anyone had ever handed him, and the next stride Doric's arm came across his chest like an iron bar and threw him back against the cliff wall, and the air where Harry's head had been turned suddenly solid and gray and screaming. A curse, a real curse, the first Harry had ever met, that struck the stone where the true line ran and burst it to splinters, and a smell like a struck match the size of a house. DOWN, Doric snarled, and Harry was already down, because he had spent 5 years learning to be exactly where the danger was not, and the part of him that did that was faster than thought. They were not alone on the road. Up the way, where the gallery widened into an old junction, 3 shapes stood in a smear of the same oily quiet Doric had felt across Privet Drive, the wizard quiet, the dishonest dark. 2 were men in the long coats of the upper world, wands out, and the wand light on their faces showed nothing Harry wanted to keep. The third was worse, because the third was small and gray and had a hand on the true line the same as Harry did, a goblin, one of Doric's own, standing easy among the wizards like he belonged there, like the grill and the vault and the long defeat had finally hollowed something all the way through. There, said one of the coated men in a bored-carrying voice, the voice of someone who has done a great deal of unpleasant work and found it tedious. The little ones got it, just as the master said it would be. Bring me the crown, goblin, and you can have your fee, and we'll all be home for breakfast. The child, too. The master wants the child. The master, Doric said, and put himself between the wand light and Harry, and his voice was a different voice than any Harry had heard him use. the voice of a creature that has decided it is going to do something it will probably not survive and has made its peace with the arithmetic. After 300 years, still sending men in coats to do at the point of a wand what was always going to be done for nothing if he'd only ever once asked. Your master couldn't ask, none of them could ask. That's the whole disease of your folk in one word, wizard. You take and you buy and you seize and you steal, and the one thing in all the ages you have never once tried is to ask. The bored man stopped being bored. He flicked his wand and the gray scream came again, and this time Doric did not dodge it, he met it. He had a thing in his hand that Harry had not seen him draw, a short, heavy bar of dark iron, a maker's tool and not a weapon, and therefore, Harry would understand later, far worse than a weapon, and he caught the curse on it the way a smith catches a spark, and the curse went into the iron, and the iron drank it and dimmed, and Doric's arm shook with the swallowing, but his feet did not move. Goblin iron eats wizard noise, Doric said through his teeth. Old lesson. Your master's family learned it 3 centuries back and never passed it down, because passing down hard-won truth is another thing your folk can't do. He took a step forward toward 3 enemies with a child and a kingdom at his back. Snarl, you that's got a hand on the line beside them, look at me. You were struck in a forge same as I was. You've got the names of the dead in your own blood, whether you've sold the memory or not. And you're standing there to help a wizard lord keep the crown of Ragnarok out of the forge for one more day. For a fee, look at what you're charging your own people and tell me the sum comes out right. The traitor goblin Snarl did not look at Doric. He looked at the crown in Harry's arms, and his eyes had the flat shine of a creature that has done its grieving early and decided to be paid for it instead, and he came forward fast and low, faster than the men, straight for the iron, his hand out to take it. He should have known better. Everything Harry had learned that night, Snarl had been born knowing and had sold. The crown could be given, it could not be taken. Snarl's gray hand closed on the band, and the crown, which weighed nothing for Harry and went quiet for Harry and glowed its bank patient red for Harry because Harry had only ever wanted to give it home, became in the traitor's grip the full and unbearable truth of itself. The banked coal woke to white. The weight of 300 years of theft came down all at once on one outstretched arm, and the heat of a forge that had never gone out poured into a palm that had reached to take and not to hold, and Snarl screamed, a sound with no sense in it, and was flung back from the iron as though the iron had thrown him down onto the stone of the road, cradling a hand that smoked, and the crown rang once. A single deep note of refusal that ran out down the chasm and up it and was heard, Harry would learn. In the deepest halls where old keepers lifted their heads and said to one another, the crown has rejected a taker. The crown is awake, the crown is close. In the half-breath while the men in coats stared at their fallen goblin, Doric moved. The river stare, he said, and shoved Harry not back but forward sideways off the road and onto a narrow cut in the cliff that fell away toward the bright river in a tight twisting flight Harry had not even seen. A maker's stare, mean and steep and unrailed and true. Hand on the line, don't look down, don't stop, I'm behind you. They can't follow clean, they don't know the cuts'll shake them. G.O., Harry went. He went down the river stair with the crown clutched to his chest and his free hand skimming the true-line groove and the bright light coming up to meet him hot and gold. And behind him he heard the men come after and heard a curse burst on the stone too high and too late, and heard Doric's iron bar ring as it ate another, and once he heard Doric grunt in a way that meant something had got through, and Harry wanted to turn and could not because Doric had said don't stop, not for anything. Not if the sky falls, and Harry had decided some hours ago in a cupboard that this was a creature whose instructions he would keep. Twice the gray scream came down the stair after them and burst on the wall a hand's breadth from Harry's head, near enough that grit stung his cheek and the smell of the struck curse filled his mouth, and twice he did not stop, because not stopping was the one thing he could do for Doric while Doric did everything else. The river stair turned and turned, mean and steep and true, and the bright light swung up at them and fell away and swung up again, and somewhere in the turning Doric took the wound that Harry had heard and not seen, a curse that got past the iron bar and laid open his forearm from elbow to wrist, and he did not cry out. He only changed the sound of his breathing and kept the bar up and kept Harry ahead of him, and kept saying in a voice going thinner with each turn, go, go, nearly there, go. The stair spat them out onto a ledge above the river, and the heat of the bright water was a wall, and across a slender bridge of black iron on the far side stood a gate. It was the first thing Harry had seen underground that was meant to stop someone. Everything else had been built to welcome, to carry, to last. This was built to refuse. 2 leaves of dark metal 3 times the height of a man, scored all over with the angular struck writing, shut, and before them, on the near side of the bridge, a line of goblins stood with their hands not on tools but on weapons, real ones, watching the river stair down which 2 figures were now running, and behind them more. Hold, Doric roared at the goblins of the gate, in a voice gone ragged, Forgeleave, I claim it. The finders behind me and the crowns in his arms open the gate. And the goblins of the gate did not open the gate, because the goblins of the gate had been told for 300 years that the crown would never come home, and were not going to be made fools of in the last hour of their watch, and they leveled their weapons at the running child instead. Harry stopped on the bridge. He stopped because a row of spear points had come up level with his chest, and because Doric was somewhere behind him with the breath he had grunted out still unaccounted for, and because the bright river roared under the iron at his feet, and because he was 5 years old and had been awake all night and walked down the inside of the world, and all of that arrived in him at once. He could have cried. A different child would have. Harry looked at the spears, and then he did the only thing he had ever found that worked, which was to be quiet and true and small, and to show the dangerous grown-ups the thing itself instead of arguing about it. He held up the crown. He lifted it off his chest in both thin arms over his head into the light of the bright river, so that the whole length of the band caught the gold and threw it back, and the banked coal in the struck names woke all along its round, not white and terrible the way it had burned the taker, but deep and warm and glad, the glow it kept for the one who carried it home, and the angular writing ran with soft red fire, and the crown, lifted up over a child's head on a bridge of black iron above a river of light. Sang, it was the note the gate goblins had heard 100 heartbeats ago come ringing down the chasm. It was the note their grandmothers had described to them, and their grandmothers' grandmothers had described to those, the one-struck shape, the returning sound, the note the whole nation kept a watcher awake in the dark forever to listen for. They had leveled their spears at a wizard child running out of the dark with the loot of the nation in his arms. They heard the note and they saw the iron lit warm and glad over the small uplifted face, and every spear on that bridge wavered and then went down, not on an order, because no order could have done it, but on the oldest reflex of a made people, which is to know their own true work when it sings to them and to bow to it. Into that silence the great scored gate opened. It did not crash. It was too well made to crash. It swung in on its own enormous balance without a sound, the two leaves parting on a darkness past them that was not empty, that was full, that was lit somewhere far within by a light steadier and redder than the river, and out of that darkness onto the threshold came an old goblin. Harry knew, the moment he saw him, that this was the oldest living thing he had ever stood in front of. Doric was hard the way a tool is hard. This one was hard the way the root of a mountain is hard, hard all the way down, hard past where hardness has a reason, and old in a way that made Doric's age look like a fashion. He wore no weapon and no ornament. He carried a hammer, plain worn, the head of it polished by use into something that gave back the river light like dark water, and he carried it not as a soldier carries a sword, but as a hand carries itself, as a thing that is simply part of what he is. His eyes found the crown first, lifted and singing over the child's head, and something happened in his ancient face that the gate goblins looked away from, because it was not a thing meant to be watched, the way you do not watch a man at a grave. Then his eyes came down to Harry and went cold. "Lower it," said the old goblin. His voice was quiet, and it carried the length of the bridge over the roar of the river without effort, the way the waking strike carried through stone. "You will not hold the crown of Ragnarok over your head on the threshold of the forge for the theater of it, child, while the men who came to take it stand bleeding on my river stare. Lower it, there. Now stand still and be silent, and let an old fool who has been wrong about every good thing for 300 years look at you and decide how he is being lied to this time." Harry lowered the crown to his chest. He stood still. He was good at standing still. And he let the oldest thing in the world look at him. "I am Bodroth," said the old goblin, "called Stoneheart, which was a jest once, when I was young, and there was anything in me soft enough to be worth jesting about. I am the eldest of the Forgemasters of this nation, and I tended the soul fire on the night the crown was taken, and I have tended it every night of the 300 years since, and I will tell you plainly, wizard child, what I believe, because you have come a long way under my mountain and earned a plain answer, if nothing else." He came forward off the threshold onto the bridge, and the gate goblins drew back from him, and Doric, limping up out of the dark behind Harry with a dark wetness down one arm, went down on one knee and stayed there. "I believe this is the cruelest night of my long life. I believe your ministry, or one of your lords, has at last grown clever enough to learn that we cannot be beaten with armies and has found a softer blade. I believe they have taken a small hungry child that nobody will miss and put the true crown in his arms and taught him a pretty speech about giving and not taking and sent him down to us so that we will open our hearts and our gates and our oldest law to him, and then when we are standing in the open with 300 years of grief on our faces, the blade will turn." The cold eyes did not blink. "Convince me I am wrong. You have until the river is louder than your answer." "Why have you brought us our crown, child? What is the trick? What do you want?" Harry thought about the question seriously because it was a serious question and the old goblin had asked it plainly, and a plain question deserved a plain answer. The river roared. He did not hurry. He had learned that hurrying made grown-ups trust you less, not more, because a true thing does not need to run. "I don't want anything," Harry said. "I know that's the answer that sounds like a trick. I worked that out on the way down. The trick answer and the true answer are the same words this time, and there's no way to say it so it doesn't sound like the trick, so I'm just going to say the true one and you can decide." He looked up at Stoneheart, and he did not flinch from the cold in the ancient eyes, because he had stood in front of colder. He had stood in front of Vernon, and Vernon's cold was the cold of a small man, and this was the cold of a deep one, and Harry would rather a deep cold any day. "Somebody took your hand." Your whole people's hand, the one with all the names in it, the dead ones and the not born ones, and they walked off with it and said it was theirs. And I found it. It got given to me by an old man who couldn't keep it. And the second I knew it was yours, I knew I had to bring it back because keeping a thing that somebody's hand would make me the kind of person who took it, and I'd rather sleep in a cupboard my whole life than be that. That's all. That's the whole thing. I don't want gold. Doric offered me gold. I said no. I don't want Dudley made sorry. He offered me that too. I said no. I don't want a reward because you don't get a reward for stopping doing a bad thing. You just stop. His voice wobbled once because he was very tired, and he steadied it as he steadied everything by telling more truth. The only thing I wanted the whole way down, I didn't even ask for it out loud because asking is how you find out you can't have it. I wanted to see where it lived. The crown. I wanted to see it get home, and I have. I saw the river and I saw the gate and I felt to be glad. So I've already got the only thing I wanted, and you haven't even given it to me. I just got it by carrying. So there's nothing left to trick you out of. You've got nothing I want except to watch the last bit happen. The old goblin looked at him. The river roared and was not louder than the answer. The crown threw a taker off the bridge tonight, Bodroth Stoneheart said at last, not to Harry but to the gate goblins, to Doric on his knee, to the whole listening dark, in the voice of a creature reading aloud a thing he has refused to believe for 300 years and can no longer refuse. It burned the hand of a goblin who reached to seize it, and it went light and it went quiet, and it sang glad for a wizard who reached only to carry it home. The iron does not lie. I have built my life on that one sentence, and the iron is telling me tonight on this bridge that this child means exactly what this child says. Something went out of him, some long brace held so long it had become his shape, and for a moment he looked less like the root of a mountain and more like something that had been waiting at a window for 100 years and seen at last the road. Iron help me, iron help us all, he's telling the truth. The words went up the chasm. They did not need to be carried. The gathered nation had been hanging on the silence over the bridge, every rail on every gallery lined now with goblins come out of their homes, and when the eldest Forgemaster said he's telling the truth, the saying of it ran up the stone the way the waking strike had run, gallery to gallery, mouth to mouth, and behind it came a sound Harry had never heard and would never forget, a sound like the sea would make if the sea were made of folk. The low gathering roar of a whole people learning in one breath that the thing they had grieved for longer than they could count was standing at their gate in the arms of a child. It was not cheering. It was older than cheering. It was the noise a wound makes when it is finally, after 300 years, allowed to begin closing, and it rolled up the great dark and broke against the unseen ceiling and rolled back down, and Harry stood in the middle of it on the iron bridge and felt it go through him and out the other side, and the crown against his chest answered it, pulse for pulse, glad for glad, home for home. That was when the men in coats reached the foot of the bridge. They had come down the river stair the slow way, the careful way, 2 of them, the third nowhere, and they came out onto the iron with their wands up and their oily quiet around them. And the bored one looked across at an old goblin and a kneeling one and a child and a crown and a row of lowered spears, and made the mistake that his kind had been making under this mountain for 300 years, which was to believe that because he could not see the strength of a thing, the thing had no strength. The master's claim is older than your law, creature, he called to Stoneheart, and the ministry will hear how you harbored a stolen child and a contested relic, and there'll be writs, there'll be inquiries, there'll be a great deal of inconvenient daylight let into this hole. Hand over the crown and the child and we forget the daylight. You know how this ends. It always ends the same way. It ends with us getting what we came for and you bowing behind your grill. Bodroth Stoneheart turned around. He did not raise the hammer. Harry watched and would describe it for the rest of his life and never quite get it across that the old goblin did not raise the hammer. He simply let the men see, for one moment, the thing he carried it as part of. The bright river guttered, the heat of it lined. All down the chasm, in 10,000 galleries, the everlasting hammer stopped, all at once, for the first time in living memory, into a silence so total that the men's wandlight seemed to shrink, and into that silence the old Forgemaster spoke, and the whole mountain spoke with him, because the whole mountain was his work and the work of his fathers, and it knew his voice. You will tell the master, said Bodroth Stoneheart, that the crown of Ragnarok came home tonight, given freely by a child who asked nothing, into the forge that made it. You will tell him the nation is crowned again, and you will tell him word for word the thing his line forgot it could ever be told, the thing that has not been true for 300 years and is true again as of this hour. We are no longer asking. Now take your wounded hireling and your writs and your daylight and go up, wizard, go up to your soft world and tell your master to look very hard at every iron thing he owns, every blade, every gate, every lock, every nail and every wall of every house his line has built on the back of what they took. It is all our work and we are no longer asking. The hammers all through the mountains struck once together. The bridge rang. The men in coats were not brave, only patient, and patience without bravery has a breaking point, and they had found it. They went, backward at first and then not, up the river stair, dragging their burned goblin between them, and the great scored gate did not need to close behind them because nothing in them wanted any longer to come through it. Doric made a sound on his knee that might have been a laugh or might have been the wound, and Harry was beside him at once, small hands on the dark wetness, saying his name, and Doric waved him off and could not quite stand and let Harry help him after all. And Bodroth Stoneheart looked down at the two of them, the bleeding seeker and the wizard child holding him up, and the crown warm and glad between. And the oldest thing in the world let out a breath it felt like he had been holding since before England. "Bring him in," the Forgemasters said, and his hard voice had a crack in it 100 years wide. "Bring them both in and shut the upper world out behind them and wake the nation, and light the great fire to its full height for the first time since the theft. The crown has come to the threshold of the forge." He turned, and the darkness past the gate took the red light and gave it back, and far within, something vast began slowly to glow. "Tomorrow, child, you will give it back the right way with your own 2 hands in front of all of us by the law. Tonight you will eat because you are thin past bearing and no guest goes hungry under this mountain while I am alive to forbid it. Come in off the bridge, you have carried it far enough." And Harry Potter, with one arm around a goblin and both eyes full of a fire he had no words for, walked off the bridge of black iron and in through the gate that refused everything but its own into the forge of the nation, and the gate stood open behind him, and the upper world, for the first time in 300 years, was the thing left outside in the dark. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. By his own hand Harry woke, not knowing where he was, which was usual, and warm, which was not. He lay still and took an inventory, as he always did before letting anyone know he was awake, because information gathered while you were thought to be asleep was the only information nobody managed your access to. He was on something soft. That was wrong. Harry's mornings began on a thin mattress over bare boards, and this was a real bed, low and broad, with a weight of woven cloth over him that gave back warmth instead of merely failing to let it out. The air smelled of hot iron and stone and something baked. There was a red light on the ceiling, which was carved, every inch of it, into a knotwork of struck lines that Harry's eye walked along and found, to his quiet satisfaction, that it never did ended. Every line came home to where it started. And under everything, felt in the bed frame and the floor and the bones of him, there was the hammering, the nation's everlasting work, near now, very near, the thing he had first heard 3 valleys off through a carpet tile and had now come all the way to the foot of. "You're awake," said Doric. "Stop pretending you're not. Your breathing changed 4 sentences ago, and I've been talking to a sleeping child like a fool ever since, which I'll thank you not to mention to anyone." Harry opened his eyes. Doric sat beside the bed on a low stool, and his forearm, the one the curse had opened on the river stair, was bound wrist to elbow in a wrapping of grey cloth that had a faint sheen of metal worked through it, and he held it a little stiffly, but he held it, and he was there, and Harry's chest did a complicated thing at the sight of him there. "Your arm," Harry said, "is mending, forge cloth and a salve older than your country." It pulled the curse out the way the iron bar did, only slower and with more swearing. Doric's hard face did the almost smile that Harry was learning to read. "I've had worse off a bad weld. Don't waste your worry on me, child. I'm dear, but I'm durable. Worry about today. Today's the day with the law in it." Harry sat up. The crown was not in the bed. He came up out of the bed before he was awake, scrabbling before he found it, set on a stand of black iron across the room, glowing its banked patient red, watched over by 2 goblins who stood so still he had taken them for statues, and he understood that it had not been taken from him so much as it had been given a guard of honor, and that the 2 still goblins had probably been standing there all night. And that this was the first night of the crown's 100-year life that it had slept guarded among its own. "They wouldn't let anyone touch it," Doric said, following his look, "not even to move it from your arms while you slept. Stoneheart gave the order. Only the finder touches the crown until the finder gives it back, that's the law. So they peeled it off you in your sleep with a forge glove and a great deal of ceremony and set it there and have been guarding it like it might escape ever since." He stood stiffly. "Eat, there's bread and there's a broth that'll put a year on you, and you need the year. You're built like a sparrow, that's lost in argument. Eat, and then they'll come for you, and then, Harry Potter, you do the thing you came down the inside of the world to do." Harry ate. He had never in his life been handed food and simply told to eat it, all of it, as much as he wanted, and the strangeness of that was almost too large to manage, larger in its way than the river of light, and he ate carefully at first, braced for someone to take it back, and then when no one took it back, less carefully, and Doric watched him eat with an expression that he turned away so the child would not have to see it. Then they came for him. They came as a procession, which Harry understood the meaning of without being told, because a procession is a way of saying this matters with your feet. At the head of it walked Bodroth Stoneheart, and behind him walked goblins Harry did not know, old ones, robed in dark cloth sewn with the struck writing in thread that held the forge light, and chief among them was one who could only be a maker of makers, a goblin whose hands were scarred to the wrist with the small bright burns of a long lifetime at the anvil, and who looked at Harry with eyes that measured him the way Harry imagined those hands measured iron, exactly, and without unkindness. And without mercy either. "This is Forgemistress Grelda," Stoneheart said. She forged the gate you came through, and the lock on the deepest vault, and a third of the great works of this age, and she will witness the return, because the return must be witnessed by the maker whose work the return thing most resembles, and there is no maker living whose work resembles the first Forgemasters as nearly as hers. Grelda inclined her head a precise half-inch. And this, Stoneheart went on, as a goblin in the rich somber dress of the upper offices came forward, older than Doric and younger than the Forgemasters, with the still face of a creature who has spent a long life saying less than he knows across a counter, is Ragnak, who speaks for the nation to your world, who keeps the bank, and who has spent the night doing sums about what your world will do when it learns what happened here, and finding that he does not like any of the answers. I do not like any of the answers, Ragnak agreed in a dry voice, but that is tomorrow's grief. Today we have a thing to do that my office stopped letting itself imagine 4 generations ago. Child. He looked at Harry with the careful attention of a creature appraising a coin of a denomination he has never seen. Do you understand what is about to happen? I'm going to give the crown back, Harry said, the right way, with my own hands where it was made in front of everybody for nothing. Yes, said Ragnak, and no, that is what you're going to do. What is going to happen is a larger thing, and you should hear it named before you stand in the middle of it, because no one should be made the hinge of history without being told that is what they are. He folded his hands. When the crown goes onto the anvil from your hands freely, the nation is crowned again. That alone would make this the greatest day in 300 years. But there is an older law underneath that one, child, a law so old we have not had cause to speak it aloud in living memory, and you have tripped it without knowing, the way a small foot finds the one loose stone in a floor 1,000 feet wide. His dry voice slowed. We will tell you of it when the time comes. For now, know only this, you have done a thing tonight that the law of our people has a name for and a price for, and the price is ours to pay and not yours to ask, and after today your life will not be the small thing the upper world made it. Be sure, before you cross the forge floor, that you give freely, because what answers a free gift down here cannot be ungiven. Harry looked at him and then at Stoneheart and then at the crown on its stand of black iron, glowing, waiting, patient, home at last but not yet given. I've been sure since the church hall, Harry said. I got more sure every step down. I'm the surest I've ever been about anything. Can we do it now? It's waited 100 years. I don't want to make it wait through more speeches. No offense to the speeches. Forgemistress Grelda made a sound that, in a creature less composed, might have been a laugh. None taken, Finder, she said. Come, the forge is lit to its height. Let us put the world's heart back where it belongs. The forge of the nation was not a room. Harry had been expecting a room, a large one, the largest he had seen, and he had readied himself for it the way you ready yourself for a big wave. The forge was not a room any more than the sky is a ceiling. They came to it down a final stair, and the stair gave onto a gallery, and the gallery looked out, and Harry's readiness was no use to him at all. It was a cavern with a floor of polished black stone and no far wall that Harry could find, and out of the center of the floor rose the anvil. He knew it was the anvil as he had known the crown was a crown, by a recognition that came up from under his words. It was vast, a single block of dark metal taller than Uncle Vernon's house, its working face worn into a shallow gleaming hollow by a use that ran back past the start of stories, and it stood in a ring of fire. Not around it, under it, through it, of it. Sole fire of the nation rose from a great round well in the floor that the anvil's foot stood rooted in, and it climbed in slow columns of gold gone red, the same light as the river, the same light as the crown, the heat the world was made hot with, and it lit the cavern the color of the inside of a forge and threw the shadow of the anvil up and up into a dark that swallowed it. And around the whole vast floor, rank on rank, gallery above gallery, higher than Harry could lift his eyes, stood the nation. All of it. Every goblin of the underforge of Britain, and Harry would learn, thousands come up through the deep roads in a single night from halls under mountains he had no names for, because word had run along the bright veins of the world faster than feet. The crown is found, the crown comes home, and a people that had not gathered whole in 300 years had gathered whole to see it. They were silent. Tens of thousands of them silent, and the only sound in all that vastness was the soul fire breathing and faint and far and constant, somewhere out past the edge of sight. A single anvil being worked by a single goblin who had refused, even today, even now, to let the everlasting work fall still, because the everlasting work falling still was the one thing the nation did not do, had not done through the whole long defeat, and would not do though the sky cracked. Harry stood on the gallery's edge with the crown in his arms and looked at all of it, and then he looked up at Stoneheart and asked the question of a 5-year-old, which cut, as his questions did, straight to the floor of the thing. Are they here to watch me give it back, Harry said, or are they here in case I don't? Both, said Bodroth Stoneheart, who did not lie to children. Walk, Finder, the law walks with you, I will be at your side the whole floor. They went down onto the floor of the forge. It was a long walk across the polished black, and the firelight came up through the stone faintly so that Harry seemed to walk on a thin skin over a deep glow, and the heat grew with every step, and the crown grew brighter in his arms, gladder, pulling toward the anvil and the fire it had been born out of like a thing on a tide. Harry's bare feet were silent. Stonehearts were silent beside him. And the nation watched a wizard child carry the soul of their people across the floor of their holiest place toward the anvil where it was made, and did not breathe. At the foot of the anvil, in the full heat and light of the soul fire, the procession stopped and the law began. Before the nation, said Bodroth Stoneheart, and his quiet voice filled the cavern to its lost ceiling, and before the fire the return is offered. But our law does not take a gift on the giver's word alone, for a gift given under any weight is not a gift but a tax, and we have paid taxes enough to the upper world and will not call one a kindness. So the finder is tested. 3 times he is offered the world, and 3 times, if the gift is free, he sets the world aside. Finder. The old goblin turned to face Harry fully, and the fire lit one side of his ancient face and left the other in the dark. You hold the crown of Ragnarok, which by your own folk's law is yours, found and carried and never reclaimed. You may keep it. Say the word, and the gate opens, and you go up into your world the owner of the one thing my people would give anything to possess, and you may sell it to the highest of your lords and never want for gold or roof or comfort again, and we will not stop you, because the law that lets us take it freely is the same law that lets you keep it. Keep the crown, child. It is worth more than your whole upper kingdom. Why would anyone give that away? And the soul fire dimmed, and the cavern darkened, and Harry understood that this was not a speech but a door held open, and that he was meant to feel the pull of it, and he did feel the pull of it because he was not a saint. He was a hungry child who had owned a marble and a key and a sweet he could not afford to eat, and the word that would make him richer than the whole of Privet Drive sat right there behind his teeth, free for the saying. No, Harry said, I don't want it. I never wanted it. I wanted it to be home, and home isn't me. The fire came back up. That's one. That is one, said Stoneheart, and something moved far back in his eyes. Forgemistress Grelda stepped forward, and the scarred hands opened, and in the air above them, woven of forgelight in her own deep craft, there grew a vision, and Harry's breath went out of him because she had reached into him and found the thing he had never said to anyone. The vision was a house. Not number 4, a house that was his, warm, with a fire in it and a door that locked from the inside and a bed that was always his and food that no one could take back, and in the doorway of it, faceless and kind, the shape of someone who had been looking for him. Someone whose whole job it was to be glad he existed, the someone he had told a goblin at a window he did not have. We are makers, said Grelda gently, which was worse than if she had been cruel. We do not only forge iron. Keep the crown, finder, or take its worth, and I will build you this with my own hands, not a vision. A true house in a true place, warded so that no Dudley and no uncle and no lord of the upper world can ever come at you again, and I will fill it, child. I will find you the someone. The nation has long arms and longer patience, and we will not stop until you are wanted somewhere the way every child should be wanted. This is not gold. This is the one thing you have ever asked the dark for. Yours only. Keep the crown. The cavern was very quiet. Even the far anvil seemed to pause. Harry looked at the house in the air for a long time. His eyes were wet. He did not pretend they weren't, because pretending a true thing was false had never once been among his faults. That's the meanest one, Harry said, and his voice shook, and he let it. Because that one's real. That one I do want. I want it so much I can't look at it. He made himself look at it. But you can't pay me with it. Because if I keep the crown to get the house, then the house is built on the crown, and the crown is the nation's hand, and I'd be living in a house made out of taking your hand, and I'd know every night in my bed that's finally mine that I sold a whole people's certainty that they go on to get myself a door that locks. And I'd never be warm in it, not really, not all the way. He shook his head hard and the tears went sideways. No, put it away, please put it away. No, that's too. Forgemistress Grelda closed her scarred hands, and the house vanished, and the old maker bowed her head to a 5-year-old, fully, the way Harry had seen no adult bow to anyone, and did not lift it for a long moment. That is too, she said to the floor, and I have forged for 300 years and never struck a truer thing than that child just struck with his own mouth. Then Ragnarok came forward for the 3rd, and his offer was the simplest and the coldest, because his whole life was the upper world, and he knew exactly what it cost a person to refuse it. Power, said Ragnarok, not gold, not a house. Power, child, the only thing in the upper world that keeps the gold and the house once you have them. Keep the crown, and the nation will make you the greatest wizard lord of your age. We will fund you, arm you, advise you, forge for you, and set you up so high that the men in coats who chased you down the river stair will kneel and call you master. You are the Potter, child. Oh yes, we know the name, we have known it since you said it at a window, and we know what your world thinks it means, the prophecy your old men whisper, the weight they have hung on you without your leave. Keep the crown, and you need never be their pawn, you will be their king. Why be given a home by the small when you could take the world from the great? Harry was very tired, and he had been offered, in 3 minutes, everything he had ever lacked, and the offering of it had cost him more than the whole walk down the inside of the world. He stood at the foot of the anvil in the heat of the soul fire, with the crown blazing glad in his arms, and he gave Ragnarok the answer of a child, which was the floor of the thing which no king would ever have found. Don't want to take the world from anybody, Harry said. Taking the world from people is the whole problem. That's what happened to your crown. Somebody wanted to be a king, so they took a thing that wasn't theirs, and 300 years later everyone's still sad. I don't want to start a new sad, I just want to stop an old one. He looked up at the dry-faced keeper of the bank, and he was crying and he was steady, both at once, the way only the very young and the very honest can be. No. Thank you, I see its real power, and I see you'd really give it, and I'm telling you no on purpose with my eyes open. That's 3. Can I give it back now, please? It's so glad, and it's waited so long, and I'm so tired, and I just want to do the one good thing, and then I'll never ask for anything again. Yes, said Bodroth Stoneheart, and his voice was not steady either, and he did not pretend it was, and 100,000 goblins heard their eldest Forgemaster's voice break on a single word, and did not think less of him, because some words ought to break the voice that says them. Yes, Finder, it is given freely. The law is satisfied. Give it back. They lifted Harry up. He was too small to reach the working face of the anvil, which stood at the height of a tall goblin's chest, and so 2 of the robed old ones made a step of their joined hands without being asked, and Stoneheart steadied him with a grip on his shoulder that Harry could feel was holding more than his balance, and Harry rose up into the full heat and light of the soul fire with the crown of Ragnarok in both his thin arms, and he looked down at the shallow gleaming hollow in the dark metal. Warmed by the working of the world's first true thing, and he knew, as he knew everything down here, that this was the exact place. This was where it was made. This was the cradle the hand had been taken from. 100 years in a cold cupboard, 300 years lost to the nation, all the long road through the dark, and it came down to child lifting an old black crown the last 2 feet of its journey home, and setting it, gently, with his own 2 hands, for nothing, into the hollow where it began. He set it down. For a moment nothing happened, and Harry had time to think, with a cold drop in his stomach, that it had all been for nothing, that he had done it wrong after all. Then the crown of Ragnarok came home, and the forge of the nation answered. It began in the band, in the struck names, the dead and the not yet born. They woke. Not to the banked patient red they had carried through the cold years, and not to the white of refusal that had thrown the taker from the bridge, but to a gold so deep and so living that Harry, who had no word for the color, would spend years trying to describe it, and only ever land on the word alive. The names lit one after another, and then all at once, every goblin who had ever been and every goblin who would ever be, blazing along the round of the crown in a script of pure fire, and the soul fire in the well beneath the anvil heard them and rose to meet them. It came up the foot of the anvil and through the dark metal and into the crown and out of the crown and up, a column of living gold roaring to the lost ceiling of the cavern and past it, and the heat of the whole deep world poured up that column, and the light of it filled the forge to its furthest gallery, so that there was not one shadow left in all that vastness, not one. The dark that the goblins had lived in and lit by hand for 10,000 years, driven back in a single instant by the world's own heart coming home to its cradle, and the nation, crowned again, made the sound. It was the sea sound Harry had heard on the bridge, the roar of a whole people, but grown now past any wound, past grief, into the thing that is on the far side of grief when grief is finally allowed to end. 100,000 voices and 10,000 miles of deep road carrying it to halls under every mountain of the world, and every goblin everywhere, the ones at the anvils and the ones at the counters and the ones asleep with their hammers on their breasts, lifting their heads in the same heartbeat to a thing they felt in their blood before any messenger could reach them. The crown is home. The line is whole. We are no longer uncrowned. After 300 years in the dark, the nation goes on, and knows it goes on, and a goblin standing in the deepest black anywhere on the earth could put his hand to his own chest and feel, returned to him, the certainty that had been stolen before his great-grandmother was struck and named. Harry stood on the joined hands of 2 old goblins at the foot of the column of living fire, smaller than he had ever felt and larger than he had ever been, and watched the crown he had carried out of a cupboard burn gold in the cradle where it was made, and he did the thing he had wanted to do since the church hall and never let himself hope he would get to do. He watched it be home. The fire sang down at last. Slowly, the way a great bell stops, not all at once but in long fading rings, the column sank back into the well, and the names settled from blazing gold to a warm steady glow, lit now, awake now, never again to go banked and grieving in the cold, and the crown of Ragnarok sat in its cradle on the anvil of the nation, restored. The soul of a people returned to the body of it, and the light it gave was the ordinary light of a thing that is simply, finally, where it ought to be. Bodroth Stoneheart lifted Harry down off the anvil. He did it himself, the eldest of the Forgemasters, with his own 2 scarred and ancient hands, and he set the child on his feet on the black floor in the new and even light. And then the old goblin, who was hard the way the root of a mountain is hard, went down slowly, joint by joint, onto one knee, so that his face was level with the face of a 5-year-old wizard, and the whole nation saw their eldest kneel, and a silence came down over the vastness deeper than any that had gone before. 300 years, Bodroth Stoneheart said quietly to Harry, for Harry, though the whole forge heard it, 300 years I have tended a fire over a wound and called it duty so I would not have to call it despair. I had stopped believing the wound would close. I had made my peace with tending it forever. And a child I have known for the length of one night carried our hand back to us out of the cold and set it home and asked for nothing, and would not be bought with gold, nor with a home, which I know is the thing you wanted, nor with the rule of the world. His voice was very low. I do not know what you are, Harry Potter. My whole nation has been saying it since you came to the gate, and not one of us is wiser, but I know what you have done. And under our oldest law, a thing done cannot go unanswered, and a free gift of this weight has one answer, and one only, and the time has come to speak it. He rose. He turned to the assembled nation and lifted his plain worn hammer, and his ancient voice rang out to the furthest gallery and down the bright veins of all the world. Forgemasters of the nation, cried Bodroth Stoneheart, the crown of Ragnak is home, given freely with nothing asked and nothing taken by the hand of one who is not of our blood. You know what that is, you know what that means. There has not been cause to swear it in 400 years, and many of you doubted you would live to see the cause, doubt no longer. The hammer came up and the soul fire leaned toward it, and the names in the crown blazed bright again as though the iron itself were listening. We will swear the iron oath. The sound the nation made then was not a roar. It was an intake, 100,000 breaths drawn in together, the sound of a people hearing the impossible named twice in one day. Ragnak came to stand beside Harry and bent and spoke low and fast, because someone had to tell the hinge of history what was about to be done to him before it was done. Listen to me now, child, because once this is sworn it cannot be unsworn, and you have a right to understand the thing you cannot stop. The dry voice had lost its dryness. The iron oath is the deepest binding my people have. We do not give our work to the upper world, we lend its use and take it back. We have never given the work itself, the making, the craft, the loyalty of the forge to any creature not of our blood. Once 400 years passed, a human woman hid the whole of a fugitive clan of ours in her cellars through a winter of pogrom, asking nothing, losing her own life for it in the end, and the survivors swore her the iron oath, and it is sung still. Before her, twice in all our history. That is the company you are about to join, Harry Potter. When the Forgemasters swear it to you, they bind their craft to your need. Their forges will open to you. Their work will answer your hand. Any Forgemaster of the nation, anywhere in the world, becomes by this oath your kin in iron, sworn to your aid, sworn to your defense, sworn to forge for you what they would forge for no other living soul. You will be in the one tongue that has a word for it, Shadur Ragnak, the friend the crown chose, the nation's own, a champion of a people who have had no champion from your world in 4 centuries. He straightened. It is the greatest honor we have to give. It is also a weight and a target and a door that will never close again, and I will not lie to a child and call it only a gift. Do you understand? Harry looked up at him. He was 5 and exhausted, and he had just watched a crown come home, and he understood perhaps a third of the words and the whole of the thing under the words, which was the only part that mattered. It means, Harry said slowly, working it out in the open as he worked everything out, you'd be my someone, all of you. The someone I said I didn't have. His face did the complicated thing again, the one Doric had turned away from. Is that allowed for me? Are you sure you've got the right boy? Because people are usually pretty sure I'm the wrong one. Ragnak, the keeper of the bank, who had spent 40 years learning to show nothing across a counter, found he had to look away for a moment before he could answer. The crown chose, he said. The crown does not make mistakes about whose hand is whose. We are very sure, child. We are surer than we have been of anything in 400 years. He stepped back and took his place among the Forgemasters, and left Harry standing alone in the even gold light at the foot of the anvil, small and watched and chosen. Then the Forgemasters swore the iron oath. They came forward one by one, and there were more of them than Harry had known, old goblins from the deep halls of the whole world, makers of makers, each bearing the burns of a lifetime at the fire. And one by one they laid a hand on the anvil beside the crown in the heat of the risen soul fire, and spoke the binding in the old tongue, the struck tongue, the language Harry could not speak and understood in his blood. And as each one spoke, a single name lit new in the band of the crown. A name that had not been there before, written into the line of the nation in living gold. The name the goblins had given him, Shadur Ragnak, the friend the crown chose, set among the dead and the not yet born, so that for as long as the crown endured, every goblin who put a hand to it and felt the certainty of the line would feel, woven into that certainty, the small warm presence of a wizard child who had carried it home for nothing. Grelda swore, and the forges of the western deeps were bound to him. The old ones of the mountain halls swore, and the forges of the east and the high north were bound to him. And last of all, Bodroth Stoneheart, eldest of the Forgemasters, who had tended the soul fire over the wound for 300 years, laid his hand on the anvil beside the crown and over the new-lit name, and looked at Harry, and swore the iron oath in the common tongue as well as the old, so that the child would hear, in words he knew, the thing that was being given to him. I, Bodroth, called Stoneheart, eldest of the Forgemasters of the nation, swear by the fire that does not go out and the crown that is home, that your need is the nation's need, and your defense the nation's honor, and your hand to hand the forge will answer until the fire is cold. What you have given freely, we answer freely. What you would not be paid, we pay anyway, for it is not a debt, it is a kinship, and kinship is the one thing in all the world that cannot be bought and cannot be stolen and can only ever be given. You came to us with no someone, you leave us with a nation. So is the iron oath sworn, so is it iron, so does it hold. So does it hold, answered the Forgemasters. So does it hold, answered the nation, 100,000 voices and 10,000 miles of deep road, and the soul fire surged, and the crown blazed, and the new name burned bright and steady in the line of the people. And Harry Potter, age 5, who had woken that morning 2 villages from a church jumble in a cupboard under the stairs, stood in the heart of the forge of the Goblin nation and was, by the oldest law there is, no longer alone in the world. He did the only thing there was to do. He went to Doric, who stood at the edge of the firelight with his bound arm, and put his arms around the goblin as far as they would go, and held on, and Doric, after a moment of holding very still, put his good hand on the child's back and held on too. The nation did not disperse. It stayed rank on rank in the new even light, and a thing began to happen that Harry did not understand until Doric, his chin on the child's hair, explained it in a rough whisper. "They're coming to look at you," Doric said. "Don't be afraid, it's the highest thing they have. Watch." They came down from the galleries, not all of them. The world would not have held all of them, but a long file of the eldest and the youngest both, and each one crossed the black floor to where Harry stood and looked at him and pressed a flat hand to its own chest, the gesture Harry had first seen at the rails on the way down, and he understood it now. It was the gesture of a goblin touching the place where the certainty of the line lived, the certainty Harry had carried home. They were saying thank you with the only word that mattered, which was a part of themselves. An ancient maker whose hands were one solid map of old Burns stopped longest and looked at Harry for a while, and then unbound from her own wrist a thin plain ring of gray iron she had clearly worn a very long time and held it out. "I made nothing today, finder," she said. "I am too old to swing the hammer, and it shames me on a day that deserves new work, so take a thing I made when my hands were young. It is not much, it is iron, and it is mine, and now it is the use of it is yours, which down here is the whole of love." She pressed it into his palm. It was warm, everything they made was warm. "When you are grown and the great works come to you, you will have blades and armor and wonders, and you will not remember an old woman's plain band. Remember it. The wonders are the nation's pride. This is the nation's heart." Harry closed his hand around the ring and could not speak and did not try to, because some things you do not cheapen by getting words wrong over them. "What happens now?" he managed at last to Stoneheart, the practical question of a child who had learned that good things ended and you were better off knowing the schedule. Do I have to go back up to the cupboard, now that it's done?" "That," said Bodroth Stoneheart, "is a question for the morning, and for your world, which will have a great deal to say about you now, more than you will like. There are wizards who will want to use what you have become, and wizards who will want to break it, and one old wizard in particular who will arrive wearing kindness like a coat and meaning to take you home for your own good. We will speak of all of it, but not tonight." He laid one ancient hand very lightly on the child's head. "Tonight you have a nation and a kin in iron and forges in every deep of the world that will answer your hand, and one bad-tempered seeker who will, I expect, refuse to leave your side now whatever I order him to do." "You'd be expecting right," said Doric from behind Harry, not letting go. Far above, the oath rang out of the deep. It went up the way the crown's first cry had gone up, through the bright veins in the cold stone and the chalk in the clay, out into the upper world, and it was not loud, and it was not a sound, but the folk in the upper world who knew how to listen felt it pass and went still. In a stone office in the ministry, a man whose whole career was the management of goblins woke from a doze at his desk with his quill snapped in his hand, and a cold certainty that something he had been paid to prevent had just happened a mile beneath him. In a dark shop that smelled of dust and old malice, a collector who had spent his life in his fortune hunting one lost crown felt the binding pass through the bones of his hands and knew, with a fury that had no bottom, that it had been found by someone else and given back and answered. And in a high round office full of whirring silver instruments, an old wizard with a long white beard and eyes that had grown very tired and very careful over a long life of arranging the world for its own good looked up from a letter he had been writing and frowned, and listened to a silver instrument that had not made a sound in 400 years begin, softly, insistently, to ring. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, What the Iron Owes the Nation, it turned out, had 300 years of gifts saved up, and it had decided to give them all to Harry in a week. He stayed in the deep. No one made him, the gate stood open, and Stoneheart had said the question of going up was the morning's question, and then the morning had come, and the question had been quietly set aside by everyone, including Harry, who had spent 5 years learning to read when a thing was being deliberately not mentioned, and had decided to enjoy this one for as long as it lasted. He slept in the broad, warm bed under the carved ceiling, whose lines never dead-ended. He ate until the sparrow look began, very slowly, to leave him. And every day Doric or one of the others came and took him by the hand and led him deeper into the forge, because the Forgemasters were making him things, and a goblin does not give you a made thing wrapped in paper. A goblin makes you watch. You have to see it made, Doric said the first morning, leading him down a stair that breathed heat. That's not ceremony, that's honesty. Your folk buy a thing finished and never know what's in it, and so they never know what it's worth, and so they sell it the first time they're short. You'll know what's in everything we give you down to the last blow, because you'll have stood and watched the iron decide to be it. Then you'll never sell it, because you can't sell something you watch get born. The first thing they made him was a knife. Harry had expected vaguely that a knife was a small thing and would be small work. He stood at the rail of Forgemistress Grelda's own forge for the better part of a day and learned otherwise. She did not start with metal. She started with a question which she put to Harry: what is a knife for? Harry said cutting, and Grelda said that was what a knife did, not what it was for, and that a thing made without knowing what it was for came out confused and served no one. The way a child raised without being told it was love came out braced for blows, and she looked at Harry when she said it, not unkindly, and Harry understood that the lesson and the gift were the same object and always would be down here. This knife is for a child who has decided not to become the thing that hurt him, Grelda said. So it will not be a knife for hurting, it will be a knife for freeing. It will cut rope and cloth and bread and the cords of a snare and the ropes of a trap, and at the worst need, the reaching hand of one who means a smaller creature harm, but it will turn in your grip and refuse the stroke if ever you raise it in cruelty rather than defense, because I am going to forge that refusal into it here today, while you watch, so that you can never make it betray the thing you are. She set the hearth iron in the fire. Watch the color. When I tell you, you will say its purpose into it in your own words, and the iron will hear you, the way the crown heard you, and it will be true forever after, because iron does not forget what it is told in the fire. So Harry watched the color, gold to white till white passed white, and when Grelda told him, he leaned over the heat as close as she let him and said in his careful whisper what the knife was for. He said it should help people get loose. He said it should never hurt anyone who was only little or only scared. He said it should be the kind of knife that the old woman with the violet brooch would not have to be frightened of, and the kind that Dudley's bullied boy could have used to cut his own hand free of the gate. And Grelda struck the white iron on the word loose, and folded it, and struck it again, and folded it, and the saying went into the blade with every blow. And by the end of the day there was a knife in a sheath of grey forge cloth that was exactly the right size for a 5-year-old's hand, and would be, by a craft Harry did not question, exactly the right size for the hand he would grow into. And it was warm, and when Harry held it he could feel, faint and certain, the promise folded into it. The refusal to be cruel, his own small voice made permanent in metal. That is goblin work, Grelda said, watching him hold it. Not because of the steel, your folk can make steel, because of what we put in it. We do not forge what a thing is, we forge what it is for. Remember that, finder, when the wizards come telling you what you are for. Only the thing itself gets to say. You taught me that with the crown, I am only giving it back to you with an edge on it. They made him other things that week, and Harry watched all of them born. They made him a coat. It looked like a child's coat, grey, plain, a little too big so he could grow, and it was woven of the same forge cloth as Doric's healing bandage. Thread of iron drawn finer than hair and worked with the patience of a people who measured time in the working lives of mountains, and it would turn a blade and drink a curse the way the iron bar had drunk the curses on the river stair, and keep a small body warm in the cold of the deep or the cold of a cupboard, and it would, Grelda said. With the nearest thing to a smile Harry had seen on her, always looked to the upper world like exactly the shabby outgrown coat of exactly the unimportant child they expected, because the best armor is the armor no one thinks to take off you. They made him a ring to go with the plain iron band the ancient maker had pressed into his palm. A ring that was the token of the iron oath that any goblin of any deep in the world would know on sight, that would open a gate and command a forge and call aid from a hall under a mountain Harry had never heard of, and that looked to anyone in the upper world like a bit of grey tin a poor child had found in a gutter, because the nation had learned across 300 years that what the upper world covets it takes, and so the nation hid its highest honors inside its plainest shells. Entrusted the worthy to know the difference, and they gave him a name in iron. This was the gravest of the gifts, and they did it last, and they did it in the deep vault where the nation kept the names, a hall Harry was not sure any wizard had ever been allowed to stand in, where the true names of the goblin dead were struck into the living rock in columns that ran up past sight, the whole memory of a people, the thing the crown carried in small. Bodroth Stoneheart took Harry there himself, and struck with his own plain hammer into a clear space at the foot of a column that held names older than the upper world's oldest king. The name the nation had given him, Shadur Ragnuk, so that Harry Potter, alone of all the wizards who had ever lived, had his name written in the rock of the goblin dead among the people who claimed him. Where it would stand and be read and be honored long after the cupboard under the stairs and the whole soft street above it had crumbled back into the clay. Now you cannot be unmade, Stoneheart said, stepping back from the struck name, breathing a little hard because he was very old and the hammer was not light. Whatever they do to you up there, whatever they take. They can take your house, they took ours, they can take your gold, your name in their world, your liberty, your very life, and I pray to the fire it does not come to the last, but if it does, child, hear me. It will not unmake you, because your name is struck in the rock of the nation among our own dead, and a name in the rock is forever, and we do not forget what is struck in the deep. You will be remembered by a whole people for as long as there is a people to remember. That is a thing not one wizard lord in their proud histories can buy. You were given it for nothing by carrying our hand home. I wanted you to stand here and see it before the upper world comes for you, so that whatever they say you are, you will know what you also are. Harry stood in the hall of the names of the goblin dead and looked at his own among them, and held a knife that would not be cruel and wore a coat that would keep him warm and a ring that could call a kingdom. And he thought about the cupboard and the marble and the sweet he could not afford to eat, and he found that he was crying again easily now, the way you cry when the crying is not from a wound but from the strange, unbearable experience of being, after a very long time, somewhere you are wanted. I haven't given you anything, he said. You keep giving me things and I gave you a crown that was already yours. I just stopped keeping it. That's not even a present. And you've made me a knife and a coat and a ring and put my name in the rock and I don't have anything to. Stop, said Bodroth Stoneheart, gently, the root of the mountain gone soft for one child in one deep hall. Stop that sum, finder. It does not come out the way your cupboard taught you sums come out. You gave us back the certainty that we go on. There is nothing in any forge of any deep in all the world that weighs as much as that, and you gave it for nothing, and so we will spend the rest of the nation's life trying to answer it and never quite manage, and that is not a debt you owe us. It is a debt we are glad to owe you, and the difference between those two things, child, is the difference between your world and ours. There was one gift left, and it was not a made thing, and they gave it on the last evening, in the broad warm room under the carved ceiling, and it was the one Harry would come to value over the knife and the coat and the ring and the name in the rock, over all of it. A champion of the nation does not walk the upper world alone, Bodroth Stoneheart said. It is in the law and it is in good sense, for the upper world is a long way from any forge and full of folk who mean you ill, and a thing as new and as watched as you will need one of us at your shoulder who knows the deep roads and knows your habits and knows, particularly, when you are about to do something kind that will get you killed. The old goblin's eyes moved, dry, to Doric, who was standing against the wall pretending he had not understood where this was going. The law of the finder may name his own guardian companion from among the nation, to be bound to him, to go where he goes, to answer to him and to the nation both, and to have no other work ever again but the keeping of him. It is an honor and it is a sentence, for the one named gives up the forge and the hall and the ordinary life of our people and spends himself wholly on a single charge. I will not order it onto anyone. It must be named by the finder and accepted by the named. Harry. Is there one of us you would name? Harry did not even have to think. He crossed the room and took hold of Doric's good hand in both of his, as he had at the cupboard window 100 years of living ago, and looked up at the hard gray face that had come up into the soft world to die and had stayed to do something better. Doric, Harry said, if he wants to, only if he wants to. He came and found me when nobody else in the whole world was looking. I'm not going to keep him if he'd rather go back to making things, but there isn't anybody else. It was always going to be him. It's been him since the window. Doric looked down at the child holding his hand and was quiet for long enough that Harry's face began to fall, braced as it always was for the no. I gave up the forge years ago, you small disaster, Doric said gruffly, before the falling could finish. I was a seeker because I was no good at the anvil and worse at sitting still, and they sent me up to die because no one would miss me, and instead I found the one thing the nation had been missing for 300 years sitting in a cupboard offering me its last sweet. So no, I don't want to go back to making things. I want the work I've already got, which is you. He closed his bandaged hand awkwardly over both of Harry's. I accept the naming. I'll go where you go and answer for you and pull you out of the kind, stupid, beautiful trouble you're going to spend your whole life walking into. The irons heard it, so has Stoneheart. It's done. It is done, said Bodroth Stoneheart, and struck his hammer once against the stone, and the binding was sworn, and Harry Potter, who 4 nights ago had not had a single someone in all the world, went to sleep that night with a nation behind him and a friend bound to his shoulder for life. And the only thing wrong with any of it was a thing he was too happy that night to feel coming. The upper world found out slowly, which is the only speed at which the upper world does anything, and then all at once, which is the only way it does anything that matters. The Goblin Liaison Office of the Ministry of Magic occupied a damp suite of rooms on the lowest level of the department for the regulation and control of magical creatures, a placement which told you everything about how the ministry regarded goblins, since it filed a proud and ancient nation in the same drawer as nuisance beasts and put the drawer in the basement. The office was run by a man named Phineas Crookley, who had wanted to run the Department of International Magical Cooperation, and then wanted to run the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and had ended up running the goblins instead, and had spent 15 years being bitter about it and looking for the lever that would pry him back upward. Crookley believed, with the total conviction of a man who has been overlooked, that the goblins were the lever. Everyone else thought them a tedious file. If Crookley could be the one who finally brought the goblins to heel, who solved the goblin problem that had embarrassed the ministry for 1,000 years, he would not be in the basement anymore. He would be minister. He had a drawer in his desk full of schemes toward this end, all of them clever and all of them, so far, useless because the goblins had given him nothing to work with. The goblins had just given him something to work with. "Say it again," Crookley said to the junior who had brought the report, in the soft voice he used when he was excited and did not want it known. Slowly, the part about the child. "They've sworn an iron oath, sir. Our source in the bank, the one we pay, he says it's the deepest binding they have. They've not sworn it in 400 years, and they've sworn it to a wizard, a child. He says the whole nation gathered, every goblin in Britain and more from abroad, for a child. The relic that triggered it, he wouldn't name it, he went gray and wouldn't say the word, only that it was something they lost a long time ago and had despaired of, and the child brought it back, and now the child is the source's word, sir, not mine, the child is theirs." Crookley sat back. He steepled his fingers, which he had practiced, against the day he would have something worth steepling them about. "A child," he said, "has done in one night what the entire ministry has failed to do in 1,000 years. He has made the goblins love him." He smiled, and it was not a pleasant thing to watch arrive. "Do you understand what that is, you bovine boy? That is not a crisis. That is an instrument. A wizard, the goblins, will do anything for is a leash on the goblins, and whoever holds the wizard holds the leash, and whoever holds the leash holds the one thing this ministry has wanted since before there was a ministry. Find out who the child is. Find out his name, his blood, his guardians, who has a claim on him and who does not, and above all find out whether anyone has thought to make him a ward of the ministry yet, because if not, Mr. Whoever you are, you and I are going to perform a great public service. We are going to take a poor lost magical child, sworn to dangerous creatures, into the protective custody of the state." He was almost purring. For his own good, of course, for his own good. The child's name reached Crookley's desk that afternoon, and Crookley stopped purring because the name was Potter, and the name Potter had a weight on it that even a basement bureaucrat knew not to lift carelessly. The boy who lived, the orphan the whole of magical Britain had a tearful opinion about. The child whose guardianship was not, it turned out, a matter of an unclaimed waif at all, but a matter that ran straight up past Crookley, past the minister, to a single old name that hung over the whole of British magic like weather. The child had been placed where he was, hidden where he was, by Albus Dumbledore. And taking anything that belonged to Albus Dumbledore, Crookley reflected, putting the report down with the care of a man handling something that might go off, was a thing a clever man did not do directly. It was a thing a clever man arranged for someone else to do, someone with an older grievance and a deeper purse and far less to lose. Crookley knew exactly the someone. He reached for his quill and a fresh sheet, and began, in his careful upward-climbing hand, a letter to a collector. The collector's name was Corvinus Burke, and he was at that hour standing in the back room of a shop in Knockturn Alley that had borne his family's name for 200 years, holding his own hands out in front of him and watching them shake. They had shaken since the night the oath was sworn. Corvinus Burke was old and rich and patient in the particular way of a man who has organized his entire life around one object he does not have, and the object was a crown. The Burkes had held it once. His own great-great-grandfather had carried it up out of the dark under a false flag of bargaining in the bad years, and the family had kept it and prized it, and in a generation of fools 2 centuries back lost it, sold it in a clearance during a bankruptcy. Let it slip into the great gray river of unmarked objects that flows through the auction houses and the junk shops and the house clearances of the world, and Corvinus had spent 60 years and most of his fortune trying to find it again. Because his family had taught him in the cradle that the crown was theirs, that it was the root of the Burke greatness, that whoever held it held a leash on the goblins worth more than all the gold in Gringotts, and that a Burke who recovered it would not merely be rich, he would be the master of the masters of money, the one wizard the goblins would have to obey. He had felt its surface 3 nights ago. After 60 years he had felt the crown wake somewhere in the soft sprawl of Surrey, and he had sent his patient quiet watcher to sit outside a house and wait while he arranged the men and the means to take it, and he had been one careful day too slow, one single day, and the watcher had felt the crown go quiet. And then the men had come back from under the mountain burned and beaten and babbling about a child who lifted it over his head and a gate that bowed to it, and Corvinus Burke had felt. That night the iron oath rang through the bones of his shaking hands, and had understood that the crown was not merely found by someone else. It was given back to the goblins by a child for nothing, 60 years, most of a fortune, and a 5-year-old had walked it down a stair and handed it home for free, and undone in one night the whole patient theft his line had built 4 greatnesses on. Corvinus Burke watched his hands shake and did not try to stop them, and when Crookley's letter came by Al that evening, proposing in careful basement language a mutually beneficial arrangement concerning a certain child, the old collector read it twice and his hands went still. In the high round office at the top of a tower in Scotland, Albus Dumbledore had been awake for 3 nights, and the silver instrument that had not made a sound in 400 years would not stop ringing. He knew what it was. He had inherited it from a predecessor who had inherited it from a predecessor, a slender thing of silver and iron that sat on a shelf among the others and had, in every recorded memory, done nothing, and beside it in the ledger of the office, in a hand 2 centuries dead, the single line, "Rings when the goblins swear the oath of iron." He had read that line as a young headmaster and thought it a curiosity. He was reading it now as an old one, with his half-moon spectacles down his nose and his long fingers steepled, and the cold traveling up from the base of his spine that he had learned, over a long and careful life, to trust more than any instrument, because it was the feeling of a plan developing a flaw. He had a great many plans. That was not vanity, it was vocation. Albus Dumbledore had spent 50 years learning that the world did not arrange itself for the good, that the good had to be arranged, patiently, often unkindly, by someone willing to carry the weight of arranging it, and he had appointed himself that someone long ago in grief over a grave and had never since allowed himself the luxury of laying the weight down. The plans were not for himself. He told himself this often, and most of the time it was even true. The plans were for a frightened world that did not know a war was coming back, and for one particular child upon whom, by a prophecy Dumbledore would have given his remaining years to unhear, the back of that war would one day break. The child was supposed to be safe. The child was supposed to be hidden and humble and ordinary, growing up unremarkable and unmarked behind the blood wards Dumbledore had anchored to the child's own aunt, ignorant of his fame, unspoiled by it, so that when the time came to bring him into the wizarding world he would be grateful and grounded and reachable, a boy who could be guided gently toward the terrible thing that would be asked of him. It was not a kind plan. Dumbledore knew it was not kind. He had made his peace a long time ago and at great cost with the difference between kind and right, and he had built his whole care for the child on the far side of that difference, and told himself that the unkindness now bought the survival later, and that survival was the only kindness a marked child could afford. And now a silver instrument that had been silent for 400 years would not stop ringing, and the reports had come up from his quiet sources in the bank, and Albus Dumbledore sat in his tower and assembled the flaw. The child had not stayed hidden. The child had not stayed humble. The child had, by some chain of events Dumbledore could not yet reconstruct, come into possession of a goblin relic of the highest order and returned it, and the goblins, who hated wizards with 1,000 years of well-earned heat, had sworn to him the deepest oath they had, and made him, a 5-year-old, a champion of their nation with forges and gold and the loyalty of a whole hidden people at his back. Dumbledore turned the thing over and the cold went up his spine, because every way he turned it, it was worse. It was not that the child was in danger, though he was. A goblin-sworn child was a prize the whole upper world would now reach for, and Dumbledore could already name 3 men who would be drafting custody petitions by morning. The danger Dumbledore could manage. Danger was the medium he swam in. What he could not manage, what made the cold climb, was the other thing, the thing he made himself look at squarely, because a man who looked away from his own motives became their servant. The child now had power that was not Dumbledore's to grant. The child now had allies who were not Dumbledore's to approve. The child now had a home, a family, a place where he was wanted, a someone, an entire nation of someones, none of whom answered to Albus Dumbledore, none of whom would deliver the child grateful and grounded and reachable in 11 years' time, none of whom could be trusted to point the child gently at the war. The plan had depended, root and branch, on the child having nothing and no one but what Dumbledore chose to give him when Dumbledore chose to give it. And the child had just been given everything, by people who would teach him, Dumbledore did not doubt, to trust the giving and distrust the men who came after with plans dressed as kindness. People exactly, in fact, like Albus Dumbledore. He sat with that for a while because he was honest enough still, after everything, to make himself sit with it. He had become, in his long campaign for the good, a man who arranged children, and here was a child who had slipped the arrangement, and the part of Dumbledore that flinched at the ringing instrument was not, he made himself admit, only the part that feared for the child. Some of it was the part that had counted on the child being moldable, and grieved the loss of that the way an architect grieves a flaw in the stone, and that part of him was not good, and he knew it, and he did not let himself pretend otherwise, and then in the way that had made him the most dangerous gentle man in the world, he set the knowledge aside and reached for his hat anyway, because the conclusion did not change. The child still had to be reached, the war was still coming. And a child sworn to the goblins was a child Albus Dumbledore could not afford to let grow up outside his hand, for the child's own sake and the world's, and in the smallest and most carefully unexamined chamber of his heart, his own. He would go to Gringotts in the morning. He would go grandfatherly and twinkling and full of genuine warmth, because the warmth was genuine. That was the terrible thing about Albus Dumbledore. The warmth was always genuine, and he would say how glad he was past words that the dear lost boy was safe, and his gratitude to the goblins for their care, and his entirely natural concern as the child's magical guardian that arrangements be put in place, proper arrangements, supervised arrangements, for a vulnerable orphan who could not possibly understand what he had been drawn into. And the steel inside the warmth would go looking, gently, relentlessly, for the seam in the goblin's new loyalty where a wedge could one day be driven. He did not enjoy it. He wanted that on the record of his own conscience, where he kept a scrupulous and merciless ledger. He did not enjoy any of it. He simply did not know how to stop, because he had been carrying the world so long that he had forgotten it was possible to set a piece of it down. And a child who set down a crown he could have kept was about to teach the greatest wizard of the age a lesson the old man had spent 50 years making himself unable to learn. He came the next morning up the white steps of Gringotts, and the upper world parted around him the way it always did, and he was shown, with a courtesy so cold it left frost on the marble, into a high stone room where Ragnock the keeper of the bank waited behind a table that had been made, Dumbledore noted, to be exactly too wide to reach across. "Headmaster," said Ragnock, "you have come about the child." "I have come about Harry, yes." Dumbledore sat uninvited in the way that made it a gift he was giving the room rather than a presumption. His eyes were kind and tired over the half-moon glasses, and the kindness was real, and Ragnock, who had spent 40 years reading the faces of wizards who wanted things, found the realness more dangerous than any lie. "I have been frantic, Ragnock. The child vanished from his home 4 nights ago. His guardians are beside themselves." This was not true. The Dursleys had not noticed, sunk under a durarmor so heavy they had spent 4 days vaguely certain it was a Tuesday. "I am his magical guardian. I placed him where he was for his protection of a kind I do not expect even your people to fully appreciate, anchored in old magic, in blood, in the love of his mother's sacrifice. He cannot be away from it. He is in danger every hour he is. I have come to take him home." "He is not in danger here," said Ragnock. "He is safer here than he has been one day of his life. We have sworn it. You felt us swear it. The whole upper world that knows how to listen felt us swear it, which is why you are here and not surprised." "I felt something." Dumbledore inclined his head. "I will be honest with you, as I hope you will be with me, for the child's sake, which I trust we both hold dearest. I know what you have sworn. I know what it means. I have read the histories your people would be surprised a wizard has read, and I am full of gratitude, truly, that in his hour of need Harry found such powerful friends." The warmth did not waver. Underneath it, the steel turned over, looking for the seam. "But he is 5 years old. He cannot consent to an oath that will shape his entire life. He cannot understand what he has been bound into, what it will make of him, what enemies it will earn him before he is old enough to lift a wand. A loving guardian does not let a child sign away his future because the people offering the quill were kind to him when he was cold and frightened. I am sure you see it. You are not a sentimental people. Surely you see that the responsible course, the kind course, is for the child to be returned to the world he was born into, to grow up among his own kind, and to choose all of this freely when he is old enough to know what he is choosing. It was, Ragnock would say afterward, a very good move. It was the best move available on the board, and the old wizard had found it at once, because it took the nation's own deepest principle, the freely chosen, the uncoerced gift, and turned it around to point at them, and a lesser keeper might have had no answer. But Ragnock had been in the forge the night the crown came home. He had made the third offer. He had watched a starving child refuse power with his eyes open. "You speak of consent," Ragnock said, "and of a child too young to choose his life. Let me tell you what we know of choices, headmaster, that you and your tower do not. 4 nights ago we put the whole world in that child's hands. We offered him gold past counting. We offered him, through a maker who reached into his heart and found the wish there, a home and a family and a someone to be glad he existed, the one thing he has wanted every day of the life you arranged for him behind your blood wards. And we offered him power, the rule of your world, the great wizard lordship, knees bent and the men who hunt him calling him master. We offered a 5-year-old everything, 3 times and 3 times, with his eyes open and his reasons clear. He set it aside, because he had decided he would rather give back a crown for nothing than become the kind of creature who takes. That is the child you call too young to choose. He chose more wisely in 1 night than your ministry has chosen in 1,000 years. And you wish to return him for his protection to a cupboard under a stair, in a house where he was given nothing, behind wards anchored in a love that the people inside that house have spent 5 years failing to show him." Ragnock did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "We know about the cupboard, headmaster. We measured the child. We saw what your protection has fed him. So do not speak to us of the kind course. We were not the ones who let him go hungry." For a moment, a long one, Albus Dumbledore did not answer. It is worth recording, because almost no one ever saw it, that the old wizard's face changed, and that the change was not a tactic. He had not known about the cupboard. He had arranged the placement and trusted the blood and never once gone to look, because looking would have shown him a thing he could not afford to fix without unanchoring the protection his whole plan rested on. And so he had chosen, in the careful, merciless ledger of his conscience, not to look and called it trust, and the goblin across the too-wide table had just held the looking up in front of him. And Dumbledore, who did not flinch from his own motives, did not flinch from this one either, and felt it land where it was aimed, in the smallest and most carefully unexamined chamber of his heart. "I did not know," he said at last quietly, and it had the awful weight of being true. "About the cupboard, I should have. That is my failure, and I will not insult either of us by pretending it is not." He took off the half-moon spectacles and polished them, which was a thing he did to buy a moment, and Ragnarok let him have it, because even a keeper of the bank does not kick a thing that is, for once, telling the truth. "But it changes nothing I came to say, and I will tell you why, and then you may hate me for it, as I half hate myself. The child carries a weight neither of us put on him. There is a war coming back, Ragnarok, a war your people will not be spared, and that child is at the center of it whether he or you or I will it or no. I have spent 15 years preparing him a path through it. It is not a kind path. I am not in this matter a kind man. But it is a survivable one, and I do not yet see how it survives him belonging, body and name and loyalty, to a nation that will rightly put its own survival first, so I cannot leave him to you. Not for his protection, which you give better than I did, I grant it freely, for the world's. Surely a people who tended a fire over a wound for 300 years can understand a man who tends one war for a lifetime. We can understand it, said Ragnarok. We understand it perfectly. We simply do not agree that it gives you the child. He rose, which ended the meeting. You will not take him, headmaster, not by writ, not by ward, not by warmth, not by the war. He is Shadur Ragnarok. His name is struck in the rock among our dead, and the iron oath holds. If your world comes for him, it comes through the nation, and the nation is no longer asking. You may tell that to your ministry, and to the men already drafting their petitions, and to the collector in Nocturne Alley who thinks we have not noticed him. The child is ours. He gave us back our certainty that we go on. We will spend the life of the nation answering it, and the first coin of the answer is this: no one takes him. No one. Albus Dumbledore put his spectacles back on and stood, and looked for a moment less like the greatest wizard of the age and more like a very old man who had been told plainly, by someone he could not out-argue, that a child he had counted on was beyond his reach, and that some of his grief at it was not noble, and that he was going to have to live in the gap between the noble part and the other part, as he had lived in that gap his whole life. Then we will meet again over it, he said, without heat, which was worse than heat. I am patient too, Ragnarok. I have buried more plans than your ministry has filed, and outlived every man who told me a door was closed. I will not come for him with writs or wards. You are right that those would break on you. I will simply be there kindly at every turn of his long road, the old man who is always pleased to see him, who never asks for anything, who only ever helps. That is how it is done with a child too wise to be ordered. You taught me just now that he cannot be bought. I already knew he could not be forced. So I will do the last thing, the patient thing, the thing your nation did to win him and never thought a wizard would have the discipline to do. He moved to the door and paused, and the twinkle came back into the tired eyes, and it was, Ragnarok thought, the most frightening thing he had seen all day. I will earn him good morning. Give Harry my warmest regards, and tell him an old man looks forward very much to the pleasure of being his friend. He left. The frost on the marble took a long time to melt. Far below in the deep, a 5-year-old who had just been given a knife that would not be cruel sat with a bad-tempered seeker and a plain iron ring, and did not yet know that, 1,000 feet over his head, the kindest and most dangerous man in the world had just promised very sincerely to spend the next 11 years becoming his friend. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The establishment's teeth. The writ came on a Tuesday, which Harry appreciated, because it was the only honest thing about it. He had been in the deep a fortnight by then, and he had a routine, which was a thing he had never been allowed before, a shape to his days that no one rearranged out of spite. Mornings he spent with Grelda, who had decided that a champion who could not read the struck tongue was an embarrassment she would not tolerate, and who taught him with the same exact mercilessness she brought to iron, so that Harry was learning, letter by struck letter, to read the names on the crown he had carried home. Afternoons he spent with Doric on the deep roads, learning the true lines, learning where the gates were, and how they answered the ring he wore, learning, Doric said, the geography of safety, because the day was coming when knowing the nearest deep road would be the difference between a live champion and a cautionary tale. And in the evenings the old ones told him things, the history of the nation, the long defeat, the names of the lords who had wronged them, and Harry listened and remembered, because remembering was a kindness you could do the dead for free. He was happy. He noticed it the way you notice a sound that has been going so long you stopped hearing it has stopped. He noticed it by its absence, by the absence of the braced feeling, the flinch he had worn under his skin so long he had taken it for a bone. It was gone. He had been a fortnight without being shouted at or going hungry or being told he was a burden, and the flinch had quietly packed up and left, and Harry walked the deep roads with his hand on the true line and his friend at his shoulder, and was, for the first time he could remember, simply a child, and did not know yet that the upper world had noticed his happiness the way it noticed everything that did not belong to it, which was as a thing to be corrected. The writ was read aloud at the surface counter of Gringotts by a ministry clerk with the unhappy face of a man who has been sent to do a thing he suspects is going to go historically wrong. It was, on its surface, unanswerable, which was the point. Phineas Crookley had spent 15 years learning to write things that were unanswerable on their surface. It was an order of protective custody, issued by the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, concerning the minor child Harry James Potter, a wizard of the realm, currently held, the writ said, in the keeping of non-human entities in conditions unknown against the interest of the Crown and the welfare of the child. It ordered the child produced. It ordered him surrendered into the protective custody of the ministry pending a full inquiry. It cited 11 statutes, 3 treaties, and 1 precedent from the Goblin rebellions that everyone involved knew was being read exactly backward. And it was countersigned at the bottom in a hand that made even the unhappy clerk lower his voice, by persons of consequence who had been persuaded that this was a simple matter of getting a lost wizard child away from dangerous creatures, and who had not been told, because Crookley was not a fool, the first thing about an iron oath. Ragnarok received the writ in the high stone room with the 2 wide table, and read it twice and set it down. They have chosen the bank, he said, to the Forgemasters who had come up from the deep at the first word, Stoneheart and Grelda among them, grey and ancient and out of place in the upper offices and entirely unbothered by it. Not the deep. They are not so mad as to send wizards down a deep road again. The river stair taught them that much. They have chosen the surface, where their law overlaps ours, where they can stand on the marble and call it the Crown's ground, and we can stand on the same marble and call it the nation's, and where the question of which law holds will be decided not by who is right, but by who does not blink. He looked at Stoneheart. They mean to make us produce him on the surface, in the lobby, in front of witnesses, and then take him in the half-second between our law and theirs. It is well done. I dislike it very much. Then we do not produce him, said Grelda. If we do not produce him, we are in open breach of a crown writ, and they will have what they truly want, which is not the child but the breach. A nation that defies the ministry's law openly is a nation the ministry may lawfully move against, and there are men up there who have wanted a lawful reason to move against us for 1,000 years. Ragnarok's dry voice was very level. This is not about Harry to Crookley. Harry is the lever, the breach is the prize. He wants us to refuse so that he can call it rebellion. And if we produce the child, Stoneheart asked, then they take him on the marble in the half-second, and the oath compels us to stop them, and we shed wizard blood in the lobby of the bank in front of the ministry's own witnesses, and that too is the breach, dressed in different clothes. Ragnarok folded his hands. He has built a trap with 2 doors and a wizard child for bait, and both doors open onto the war he wants. It is the cleverest thing anyone in that ministry has done in my lifetime, and I would admire it if it were not aimed at a 5-year-old who gave us back our soul. Into the silence, Bodroth Stoneheart said the thing none of them wanted said. There is a 3rd door, the eldest Forgemaster said slowly. There is always a 3rd door in a trap built by a clever man, because a clever man cannot help admiring his own cleverness too much to guard the door he thinks no one would take. He looked old and tired and absolutely certain. We produce the child, we do not refuse the writ, but we do not produce him as a thing handed over. We produce him as what he is. We bring Shadur Ragnarok up onto the marble in the open before all their witnesses, wearing the oath, and we let him answer for himself, and we let the upper world see with its own eyes what it is trying to take into protective custody. Crookley has built his trap to catch a victim. Let us see how it holds a champion. He is 5, said Grelda. He refused the rule of the world at 5, said Stoneheart. I have stopped using his age as a measure of what he can carry, so I think will the ministry by the end of Tuesday. He turned for the deep to go and tell the child, bring everyone, every Forgemaster who can stand. If they want the question of whose law holds answered on the marble, we will answer it, and we will bring the crown. They told Harry the whole of it in the broad warm room, and they did not soften it, because Stoneheart had decided weeks ago to stop using the child's age as a reason to lie to him, and the decision held. It is a trap, the old Forgemaster said. A clever one, built to catch us no matter which way we move, and the bait is you. If you go up onto that marble, men will reach for you, and some of them may get a hand on you before we can stop them, and there will be wands, and there is always the chance, in a room full of frightened wizards with weapons, that something goes wrong that no one meant. I will not pretend it is safe. I will not carry you up there asleep and let you wake in the middle of it. You are the finder and the champion, and your name is in the rock, and a creature whose name is in the rock gets told the truth and gets to choose. He looked at Harry steadily. You could stay below. We would fight the writ in the slow way with Ragnarok's clauses and 100 years of patience, and you would never have to stand in front of the thing that wants to take you. No one here would think the less of you. You are 5. Choosing the safe deep would be the same thing, and I would carry the shame of having offered you the dangerous one for the rest of my life. Choose, finder, truly. Either way, the nation holds. Harry thought about it as he thought about everything, turning it over honestly in the open. He thought about the lobby full of grown-ups who wanted to use him, and the part of him that had spent 5 years learning to be exactly where the danger was not, which wanted badly to stay in the warm deep where the flinch had finally left him. He let himself feel how much that part wanted it, and then he set it down gently as he set down everything that was not the thing that mattered. If I hide, Harry said slowly, they win the part where I'm a thing that can be hidden. And the whole entire point of everything is that I'm not a thing. I'm not Crookley's thing or Burke's thing or the ministry's thing. You taught me that, you and the knife, that only I get to say what it's for. So I can't let them turn me back into a thing that has to be kept in a safe place, because then I'd be back in the cupboard, just a nicer cupboard, a deep warm one, but still a place I got put for safekeeping while the grown-ups decided about me. He looked up. I want to go up. I want to stand on the marble and let everyone look at me and let me say it myself. I'm not scared of being looked at. I'm an expert at being looked at. I just never got to talk back before. A pause, and then, because he was honest to the bone, and I want Doric next to me. I'll be braver with Doric next to me. Is that allowed, to be braver because of a friend, or does it only count if you're brave on your own? It counts most of all that way, said Bodroth Stoneheart, and his ancient voice was rough. A creature who is brave alone is brave. A creature who lets a friend stand at his shoulder and is brave anyway, knowing the friend can be hurt for it, and goes up regardless because the right thing asks it, that creature is something the upper world has a great deal of trouble killing. Doric goes up at your shoulder. He would chain himself to it if I forbade him. Come, let us go and disappoint a clever man. They brought him up at noon because Crookley had specified noon, wanting the lobby full. It was full. Word of a goblin-held Potter had leaked exactly as far as Crookley had leaked it, and the great marble hall of Gringotts held a crowd it had not held in a century. Ministry men in their good robes, a row of oars arranged to look like ceremony, and standing like a wall, 3 reporters with self-inking quills already trembling, a scatter of the merely curious who had felt the morning go strange and followed it here. At the center, behind a velvet rope that some optimist had strung across goblin marble as though a rope meant anything to the nation, stood Phineas Crookley in his best robes, climbing at last out of the basement, and beside him, leaning on a black cane, dressed in the deep expensive gray of old money, stood an ancient wizard whom most of the crowd did not know and the goblins knew at once, because they had carried his family's name in their shoe for 300 years. Corvinus Burke had come to watch them produce the child. Harry came up the long stair from the deep between Stoneheart and Doric, and behind them came the Forgemasters, rank on rank, grey and ancient, more goblins of consequence in one place than the upper world had ever been permitted to see, and behind them, carried on a bier of black iron by 4 of the eldest, under a cloth of forgelight, came the crown. The lobby, which had been loud, went quiet in pieces, the way a field goes quiet when a shadow crosses it. The Auror's walls stiffened. And Harry, in his shabby grey coat that turned blades and looked like nothing, with a knife that would not be cruel at his belt and a plain iron ring on a cord round his neck, and his name struck in the rock 1,000 feet below, walked out onto the marble in front of the whole staring upper world, small and watched, and entirely unafraid, because he had spent a fortnight learning that he was not alone, and the lesson had taken. There he is, said Crookley warmly for the reporters, spreading his hands. The poor child. Harry, my boy, you're quite safe now. Come here, come away from them, no one's going to hurt you. You're with your own kind now, the ministry has you. Harry looked at Crookley for a moment with the flat, patient attention he had once given to a junk table, the attention of a person deciding a thing carefully. You don't know me, Harry said, his clear child's voice carried in the hush better than Crookley's practiced warmth. You called me your boy, and you've never met me. People who actually want to help you don't start by pretending they already know you. They ask. Doric asked. He came to my window and he didn't know me at all, and the first thing he did was ask me my name and listen to the answer. He tilted his head. You're not here to help me, you're here to use me. I can tell because I've been used my whole life. I'm an expert, and you're doing the thing the experts do, which is be nice in the voice and hungry in the eyes. I'd rather you just said what you wanted. It's quicker and it's not as rude as it sounds, because pretending is the rude part, not asking. There was a silence in which one of the reporter's quills could be heard scratching at a furious gallop, and Phineas Crookley's warm face did something it could not afford to do in front of witnesses, and the old wizard on the black cane began softly to laugh. Oh, Crookley, said Corvinus Burke in a dry, ruined voice. He has your number and he's 5. I told you the soft approach was beneath the moment. He came forward past the velvet rope, which the Aurors let him cross because money crosses ropes, and he stopped a few feet from Harry and looked down at him, and the hunger in the old collector's eyes was a different and older thing than Crookley's, a hunger that had eaten a whole life and was still not full. Let me do the rude part then, child, since you prefer it. My name is Burke, Corvinus Burke. Does the nation behind you flinch? Look at them. They're flinching. Ask them why. I know why, Harry said. Your family took the crown. The lobby, which had not known what the relic was, heard the word crown and leaned in. My family, said Burke, and his voice rose and shook, 60 years of it shaking loose at once, took back what was owed. We were owed. We civilized this country while these creatures squatted in the dark counting other men's gold. My great-great-grandfather brought that crown up out of the muck and made it the root of the Burke greatness. And it was ours, ours by every law that matters, by the law of who is fit to hold a thing, and a clutch of bankrupt fools in my own line lost it, sold it, let it slip into a jumble bin, and I have spent 60 years and a fortune that would buy this ministry hauling it back from the dark. And I felt it 3 weeks ago, I felt it wake. I was one day from having it, one day, and you. The cane came up not quite pointed at Harry, trembling. You carried it down a stair and gave it back, for nothing. You undid the work of 4 generations of my house in a single night, you ignorant, sentimental, gutter-bred little. Mr. Burke, said a new voice, mild and clear and very tired, from the great doors. I really would not finish that sentence, not for the child's sake, for your own. There are a great many quills in this room, and history is listening, and you are about to say a thing your name will wear for 100 years. Albus Dumbledore had arrived, and the lobby turned to him the way iron filings turn. And Harry looked at the old wizard with the long white beard coming kindly across the marble, and felt, under his fortnight of healed flinch, something new wake and go quiet and watchful, because the old man's eyes were warm and the warmth was real, and Harry had just told Crookley that he was an expert in being used, and the expert in him looked at Albus Dumbledore's genuine warmth and went, very quietly. On its guard, Dumbledore stopped in the open marble between the velvet rope and the goblins, in the place where everyone could see him, which was never an accident with Albus Dumbledore, and he spoke to the whole room while seeming to speak only to its better nature. This has gone very wrong and quickly, and I think we all feel it, he said, gently, sorrowfully, the voice of reason arriving late to a fire. A child has been made the rope in a tug of war between a ministry order and an ancient nation and a private grievance, and not one of the 3 parties pulling has asked the child what he wishes, which the child himself, I notice, has just pointed out with more wisdom than any adult in this hall has managed today. He inclined his head to Harry warmly, and the warmth was real, and it was also a move. It set Dumbledore beside Harry, the one grown-up who listened, the reasonable friend, exactly the position he had told Ragnarok he would take, claimed now in public in front of the quills. Surely there is a better path than seizure. I propose a custody of compromise. Let the child be placed for now under a neutral guardian acceptable to all, with access granted to the ministry's inquiry and to the nation both, under my personal oversight as his magical guardian, so that this may be resolved by law and not by force, with the child's welfare and not the adult's pride at its center. I ask the nation to consider it. I ask the ministry to consider it. I ask only what any of us would ask, that we stop pulling on the rope. It was, Ragnarok thought, watching from the foot of the stair, beautiful. It diffused Burke, rebuked Crookley, charmed the quills, and ended with Harry under Dumbledore's personal oversight, the only outcome in the room that gave the old wizard exactly what he had come for, all of it wrapped so deep in genuine decency that to refuse it would make the nation look like the unreasonable party. The 3rd door had a 4th door behind it, and Dumbledore had been standing in it the whole time. But Phineas Crookley had climbed out of the basement that morning, and he was not going back, and he saw his clean ministry triumph being turned, in front of the press, into Albus Dumbledore's compromise, with Dumbledore's name on the credit and Crookley's on the embarrassing writ, and a man who has waited 15 years does not let the prize be lifted gently out of his hands by a kindly old colleague. Crookley did the stupid thing, the thing clever men do when their cleverness is failing in public. He reached for force. The writ stands, Crookley said too loud. Orders, the child is a ward of the crown as of noon, take him into protective custody. Now, the wall of Horrors hesitated, because the wall of Horrors could see the goblins, and then it moved, because orders are orders, and 3 of them came across the marble toward a 5-year-old, wands not raised but ready, and the whole hall drew the breath it would let out as either a scandal or a slaughter. Several things happened in the space of 2 seconds, and Harry was at the center of all of them. The Forgemasters moved, and the marble of Gringotts remembered whose hands had laid it, and a sound came up through the floor that put every wizard in the lobby on the balls of their feet, the everlasting hammers, far below, beginning to strike toward the surface. Doric moved faster than the oars and put himself between Harry and the 3 advancing wands with his bandaged arm out, his body a small gray wall, exactly as he had on the river stair, exactly as he would until the fire was cold. And Corvinus Burke, 60 years of hunger boiling over at the sight of the crown, sitting there on its bier under its cloth of light, 3 feet away, unguarded in the chaos, his at last, his by right, made the oldest mistake of his family's long history of mistakes. He lunged past the oars and tore the cloth from the crown and seized it in both shaking hands. Mine, Corvinus Burke shrieked, lifting it, 60 years in the word. The crown of Ragnarok, which weighed nothing for the child who had carried it home for nothing, became in the thief's grip the full and unbearable truth of itself for the 2nd time, but this time in the noon light of the surface, in front of the ministry's own witnesses and 3 reporters galloping quills. The bank patience woke to white. 300 years of theft and 60 years of hunting came down at once on two outstretched arms. The heat of a fire that had never gone out poured into the palms of a man who had reached, like every Burke before him, to take and not to hold, and Corvinus Burke screamed a sound with no sense in it and was flung back from the iron the length of the velvet rope. And the crown rang once, a single enormous note of refusal that cracked two marble pillars and threw every wizard in the lobby to their knees and was heard. The reporters would write as far as the street, and the crown fell. And did not strike the floor because Harry was under it. He had not thought about it. The part of him that moved before thought, the part 5 years of danger had honed to a blade, had seen the crown thrown loose and had simply been there, as he had always been, exactly where he needed to be. And he caught the soul of the nation out of the air in both thin arms in front of the whole upper world, and it went light for him and quiet for him, and the white rage of it sank at his touch to the warm glad red it kept only for the one who had given it home. And Harry knelt on the cracked marble with the crown safe and gentle in his arms, and the everlasting hammers underneath the floor stopped all at once because they did not need to come up any further. The whole hall had seen. They had seen the crown burn a Burke and bless a Potter. They had seen with their own eyes under the noon with the quills running, the thing the goblins had been saying for 300 years and no wizard had ever believed, that the crown chose, that it knew its own, that it could be given but never taken, and that everything the Burke line had told itself for 4 generations about owning it was and had always been a thief's lie that the iron itself would not allow. "He's hurt," Harry said. He was not talking about Burke. He had turned on his knees with the crown in his arms to Doric, who had taken the curse that one of the oars falling had loosed by reflex. A curse meant for nothing and no one that had found the small gray body standing between 3 wands and a child. And Doric was down on the marble with the darkness spreading under his bandaged arm and up into his chest, his breath gone to the thin whistle Harry had heard on the river stair and prayed never to hear again, and Harry set the crown down carefully on the cracked floor and went to his friend and put his hands on the wound as he had in the dark of the deep and said his name, and this time Doric did not wave him off because this time Doric could not. "Hold on," Harry told him. "You held on for me on the stair, you hold on now, that's fair, that's just fair." He did the only thing he knew. He had no craft, no salve, no 400-year-old healing. He had a fortnight of being told how the deep worked and a memory that did not let go of useful things. Goblin iron eats wizard noise. He had watched the iron bar drink the curses on the river stair until Doric's arm shook with the swallowing. He pulled the cord over his head and took the plain iron ring, the oath token, the warm gray band that any goblin in the world would know, and he pressed it flat against the spreading darkness on Doric's chest, against the curse. And he wanted, with the part of him that had gone quiet enough to hear the crown in a church hall, he wanted the iron to drink it, as he had once wanted the crown to be unseen, and he stopped wanting it out loud and let the wanting sink down to where the metal listened. The ring grew hot in his fingers. The darkness under it slowed and shuddered and began in thin threads to draw out of Doric and into the iron, the curse following the call of metal the way the river follows the cut. And Doric's whistling breath came a fraction deeper and held and did not stop, and that was when Grelda reached them, the Forgemasters on her knees on the cracked marble with her scarred hands already glowing, and she looked at what the child had done with the ring and said one word, good, fierce and low. The highest praise she had, and took up the work with a craft Harry did not have, and between the old maker's hands and the child's borrowed iron they held the curse, and held Doric and would not let the dark have him. Above them, the lobby of Gringotts was a wreck of a triumph. It is one thing to plan a clean seizure of a lost child from dangerous creatures, with the press on hand to applaud the rescue. It is another to have the press on hand to record that you ordered 3 oars to lay hands on a 5-year-old, that the moment they did, an old aristocrat lunged past your line and stole the very relic at the heart of the dispute, that the relic itself, with the whole hall watching, burned the thief and blessed the child, that the child then caught the falling crown, set it gently down, and knelt to save the life of the goblin who had taken a stray curse shielding him. And that the only person in the entire affair who had behaved with consistent honor throughout, from the first word to the last, was the 5-year-old you had come to take into protective custody for his own good. Phineas Crookley stood in the middle of his climbed out of the basement morning, and watched 3 reporters write all of it down, and felt the basement open under his feet again, and this time go all the way down. "I think," said Albus Dumbledore into the wreckage quietly, "that the question of who endangers this child and who protects him has just been answered by the child himself, rather more clearly than any inquiry could have managed." He had crossed to where Burke lay, and he was the one who summoned the healers for the ruined old collector's burned hands, which was mercy, and was also Dumbledore placing himself again as the only adult in the room who helped rather than grabbed, and Ragnarok, watching, marveled tiredly that the old wizard could not stop maneuvering even while doing genuine good, that the good and the maneuvering had grown into one fabric in him so completely that Dumbledore himself, Ragnarok suspected, could no longer find the seam. The old wizard straightened and faced the ministry men and the reporters and the whole staring hall and used the moment, because using moments was what he was, but he used it this time in a direction that happened to be true. "Hear me, since we are all gathered and the quills are awake," Dumbledore said, and the warmth in his voice had steel under it now, and the steel was aimed for once at the right targets. "I came here today to argue that this child should not belong wholly to the Goblin nation, and I will be honest before witnesses that I argued it partly for reasons that were mine and not his, and I have just watched him teach me my error in a way I will not soon forget. Whatever claim I thought I had on Harry Potter's future, I yield this much of it publicly. He is no one's instrument, not the ministry's, not Mr. Burke's." A pause waited, and only Ragnarok was close enough to feel the rest of the sentence land where it was truly pointed, which was at Dumbledore himself. "Not mine. The writ before us is a disgrace. It was procured by a man who saw a lever where the rest of us should have seen a frightened, extraordinary boy, and it should be withdrawn before this hall today with apology. I will see that it is. And the matter of the crown and the matter of the Burke family's long possession of stolen goblin work are matters I think the nation has settled rather definitively, in front of more witnesses than any court could seat, by the simple expedient of letting the iron speak for itself. It was, again, perfect. It conceded nothing he could not afford and claimed the high ground he most needed, the ground of the reasonable friend who had grown wise, and it bought Crookley's downfall and Burke's disgrace at no cost to himself, and it left Albus Dumbledore standing in the wreck of everyone else's schemes as the one wizard who had spoken for the child, which was exactly where he had told Ragnarok he intended to stand. And underneath the perfection of it, Ragnarok could hear, because he had been listening to wizards across a counter for 40 years, one note that was not a maneuver, one true thing the old man had said and meant, not mine. He had said it in front of witnesses where he could not take it back. Whatever else it was also a vow, and Dumbledore did not make vows he intended to break, only ones he intended to interpret very, very carefully. Phineas Crookley's writ was withdrawn before the hour was out, because a writ that has produced a martyred goblin and a vindicated relic and a child hero in the same noon is not a writ any person of consequence wishes their countersignature found near. Crookley himself was finished, though it would take the ministry a few face-saving weeks to admit it. He had reached for force in front of the press and missed, and the upper world forgives many things but never that. Corvinus Burke was carried out with his hands wrapped, his name now permanently soldered in 3 different newspapers' morning editions, to the word thief, the one word his family had spent 4 generations and a fortune outrunning, caught at last by a crown that would not lie and a child who would not take. The Burke greatness, such as it was, did not survive the week. And Harry Potter knelt on the cracked marble of Gringotts with a Forgemasters, holding an iron ring full of swallowed curse against the chest of his one bound friend, and paid no attention to any of it, because the only piece of the day that mattered to him was the thin whistling breath under his hands, going slowly, blow by held blow, back toward something like steady. "You're going to be all right," Harry told Doric fiercely, not asking, because asking was how you found out you couldn't have a thing, and he had decided he was not going to find that out, not about this. "You have to be. I named you. Stoneheart said it's a sentence. Being named, you don't get to leave, so you don't get to leave. That's the rule. You said the iron heard it." His voice did the thing it did, the wobble, and he let it openly in front of the whole upper world, because he was done pretending true things were false and he had never been more sure a thing was true. "Hold on, I've got you. For once it's me that's got you. Hold on." Doric's eyes were open. They found the child in the hard gray face, gray now with more than its nature, did the almost smile, and his cracked voice came up just far enough to be heard by the one person he was speaking to. "Small disaster," Doric whispered. "I'm not going anywhere. Who'd pull you out of the next one?" His good hand found Harry's wrist and held it weakly against the iron and the wound. "Told you, dear but durable. Now stop crying on me, you'll rust the work." And Harry laughed, which surprised him, a wet and broken laugh in the middle of the wreck of the establishment's best trap, and the crown glowed warm and safe on the cracked marble beside them, and the nation stood guard in the reckoning, the long political reckoning of what the upper world would now have to do about a child it had tried to take and failed, gathered itself somewhere over their heads and began slowly to come. They took Doric down to the deep on a bier of black iron, the way they had carried the crown up, and Harry walked beside it the whole way with his hand on his friend's good arm and the curse-fed ring cooling slowly in his fist, and Grelda walked at the other side with her scarred hands still glowing, and they did not let him die, the makers. They were very good at not letting things end. And by the time they reached the warm room under the carved ceiling, the whistle had gone out of his breathing, and the gray had begun to leave his face, and Harry let himself, finally, believe it. Before they left the marble, though, the old wizard with the long white beard came to Harry one last time, and crouched slowly with the small effort of great age, so that his kind tired eyes were level with the child's, and the reporters were too far and too busy to hear what passed between them, and so it was said as only the two of them would ever know it had been said. "You were magnificent today, Harry," Albus Dumbledore said, and meant it. "I have lived a very long time and watched a great many people decide who they are going to be, and almost none of them do it as clearly as you did it just now at 5 on a cracked floor. I find I am rather in awe of you. I also find, and I will tell you this because I think you are the sort of person who would rather be told, that I came here today to arrange your life in a direction of my choosing, and that I have not entirely given up the idea because I am a stubborn old man with reasons I believe in. So here is my honesty in exchange for yours. I am not your enemy. I am not quite your friend yet either, whatever I said for the quills. I am something more troublesome than both, which is a man who wants very much to do right by you and is not always able to tell the difference between that and doing right by his own plans. You should watch me. You have good instincts. I felt them turn toward me when I walked in. Keep them turned. It will make you safer, and it will, in the long run, make me better, which almost no one has managed in 100 years. Harry looked at the old wizard for a long moment, the flat, patient attention, the deciding. "Thank you for helping with Burke's hands," Harry said. "That was real. I could tell that one was real." Then, because he was honest, and because the watchfulness under his healed flinch had not gone back to sleep, "I am going to watch you, not because I hate you. I don't hate you. I think you're sad and tired, and you've been carrying something too heavy for too long, and it's made you forget that the people you're carrying are people and not parcels. I know about being a parcel. I'm not going to be one again, not even a kindly carried one." He picked up the crown, which went light for him, and held it against his chest where it belonged. "You can be my friend if you want. But you have to actually ask like Doric did, and you have to mean it the asking way and not the using way, and I'll be able to tell because I'm an expert. Most people aren't ready to be friends with someone who can tell. You think about whether you are. Take as long as you want. I'm only 5. I've got time." And Albus Dumbledore, the greatest and most dangerous wizard of the age, knelt on the cracked marble of Gringotts and was, very gently and very completely, seen through by a child, and found that the experience was not painful exactly but clarifying, the way cold water is clarifying, and that he had not been spoken to so honestly in 50 years, and that some long-frozen thing far down in him had shifted a half-inch toward thaw. "That," he said, rising, "is the best offer I have had in a very long time. I will think about whether I am ready. Thank you, Harry, truly. Give my regards to your friend, and tell him the nation chose its champion's guardian well." He turned, and the crowd folded around him, and he went out into the upper world to begin. Ragnarok did not doubt. 11 years of the patient work of becoming worthy of a 5-year-old's friendship, which was either the most hopeful thing that had happened in the lobby that day or the most ominous, and was, this being Albus Dumbledore, almost certainly both. Down in the deep that night, Harry sat by Doric's bed in the warm red light and would not be moved, and Stoneheart sat with him for a while in the particular silence of the old, and at last the eldest Forgemaster said the thing that turned the day's victory toward the trouble still coming. "We won the marble," Stoneheart said. "We did not win the war the marble was a battle in. Crookley is finished, and Burke is disgraced, and the writ is ash, and that is good, that is very good. But the upper world has now seen what you are, child, all of it has seen. The quills have carried it to every breakfast table in magical Britain, and a thing the whole world has seen cannot be put back in a cupboard. They will not try force again. Force failed in front of the press, and the press does not forget. They will try the slower things: law, petition, patience. They will try, for the rest of your childhood, in 100 clever, quiet ways, to fold you back into the shape they need you to be, and chief among them will be a kind old man who is, the iron help us all, mostly sincere." He put one ancient hand on the child's shoulder lightly. "Tomorrow the reckoning starts. The ministry will send its careful men, and there will be treaties to write, and a new place for the nation in the upper world to argue over, all of it turning on a 5-year-old who would rather sit by a sickbed. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we begin teaching the upper world how to deal with a people that is no longer asking, and a champion it can no longer take. It will take years. It will not be gentle. But it begins, finder, from strength, for the first time in 300 years, and that, whatever it costs, is worth being tired for." Harry nodded and did not let go of Doric's good hand, and watched his friend breathe in and out, dear and durable, and did not think about the reckoning at all, because the reckoning was tomorrow's, and tonight, for the first time he could remember, he had something worth sitting up all night to keep. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, Champion of the Nation. The reckoning took the rest of the summer, and it was conducted on the nation's side by a 5-year-old who mostly was not there, which was the single fact the upper world found hardest to forgive. They had wanted a crisis they could manage, with named adversaries and a table and terms. What they got was Ragnarok, the keeper of the bank, sitting behind the too-wide table day after day with a copy of 3 newspapers and a very small smile, declining courteously to be in a hurry. The ministry sent its careful men, the ones with no grievance and good shoes, sent to clean up after Crookley and to find out, urgently, what a nation that was no longer asking intended to ask for. And Ragnar told them in the patient way of a creature that has waited 300 years and can therefore wait 3 more months without strain, that the nation intended to ask for very little, which frightened the careful men far more than a long list would have. We do not want your gold, Ragnar said to a deputation that had come braced to haggle over gold. We have more than you do. We have been counting yours for 1,000 years and skimming nothing, which is more than your own bankers can say. We do not want territory or seats on your councils or the repeal of your insulting little statutes, though you may repeal those if it eases your conscience. The one about the wand permits in particular is a daily embarrassment to whoever wrote it. He folded his hands. We want one thing and we will have it, because the alternative is that every iron object in magical Britain remembers all at once, on a morning of our choosing, exactly whose work it is, and your world discovers how much of itself we made. We want the theft acknowledged, publicly, in your own records, in your own hand. We want it written where your children will read it, that for 1,000 years your people took the work of ours and called the taking commerce and called us the cheats, and that it was a lie, and that the lie ended on the noon a crown your ministry had never heard of burned a thief and blessed a child in the lobby of this bank. Write that, teach it. That is the whole of our demand, and it costs you nothing but the one thing your people have never once been willing to spend on us, which is the truth. Spend it. Or go home and explain to your minister why the locks stopped working. The careful men went home and came back and went home again, and in the end they spent the truth, because the locks were not a bluff and everyone in the room knew it, and because a young witch in the Department of Magical Law had quietly pointed out that the only party with clean hands in the entire Burke affair was the Goblin nation, and that aligning the ministry, late though it was, with clean hands and a heroic orphan against a disgraced collector and a corrupt liaison officer was not merely just but. She had ventured popular, and the careful men had not heard the word popular used about goblins in their entire careers, and found that it changed the shape of the negotiation entirely. So it was written, not all at once and not generously, and with a great deal of face-saving language that fooled no one and was allowed to stand, because letting your defeated adversary save face is how you keep him from having to fight again. But it was written. The theft of the crown of Ragnarok was acknowledged in the ministry's own record. The goblin understanding of made things, the lending of the use and the homecoming of the work, was for the first time in 1,000 years set down in a wizard's hand as a philosophy and not a fraud. And in 100 schoolrooms the following year, magical children learned a sentence their parents had never been taught, which was that the goblins were the oldest honest dealers in Britain, and had been wronged and had been right. It was not justice. 300 years and a stolen soul are not paid back by a paragraph. But it was the first true word the upper world had ever said about the nation, and the nation, which measured time in the working lives of mountains, knew exactly what to do with the first true word, which was to build on it slowly, the way you build everything that lasts. Harry was not in the room for most of it. He was asked once what he wanted from the settlement, and he thought about it seriously, as he thought about everything. And he said he wanted the old woman with the violet brooch to be all right, which baffled the careful men until Ragnar explained dryly that the champion of the nation was declining again to ask anything for himself, and that they had best get used to it, because it was going to keep happening, and it was going to keep making them look small. And there was nothing to be done about it except to become, very slowly, the kind of people it made look less small. Which was, Ragnar did not add, the entire goblin theory of how the world improved, not by force and not by gold, but by the patient, unbearable example of someone who would not take, standing in a room full of people who always had, until the taking began here and there to feel like what it was. There were 2 people in the upper world Harry had asked the nation to find, and the nation, which had learned from its champion that a request made for someone else was the only kind worth hurrying for, found them both. The first was the old woman with the violet brooch. Harry had mentioned her only once in passing, when the careful men asked what he wanted from the settlement, and Ragnar had quietly set a seeker to the task, and it took a single afternoon. She lived alone in a small flat 2 villages from the church hall, on a pension that did not stretch, with her Albert 60 years dead and his violet pinned over her heart, and she had no idea, and would never be told, that she had once handed a lost child a lesson in returning things at exactly the hour he needed it. The nation did not announce itself. The nation simply arranged, through a chain of perfectly ordinary-seeming kindnesses, that her roof stopped leaking, and that a clerical error in her favor was discovered at the pension office, and that a neighbor she had never met before began dropping round with more soup than one household could eat, and that the violet brooch, when its 60-year-old pin finally gave way one morning, was mended overnight by hands she never saw, mended in goblin iron drawn finer than hair, so that it would never break again. Not in her lifetime, nor in any museums after. She lived out her days a little warmer and a little luckier than the arithmetic of her life could explain, and she put it down to the goodness of strangers, which was, for once, the exact truth. The second was old Tibbet, and finding him mattered more to Harry than the whole treaty, because Tibbet had known. He still did the house clearances nobody else would touch. The nation came to him directly, which it did for almost no one, because Bodroth Stoneheart had heard the whole story of the church hall from Harry, and had said that a man who could hold the crown of Ragnarok for 11 years and feel that it was minding and tend its dreams without ever once trying to sell it for what it was worth. A man who in the end gave it for nothing to a quiet child because he judged that the child might carry it home, was a man the nation owed a debt of recognition, squib though he was. Cut off from magic though his world had left him. They came to his table at the next jumble sale, two of the old makers in the shabby coats of the upper world, and they did not buy anything, and they told him low in the dead corner of the hall where the grown-ups did not go that the crown had gone home, that the child had carried it down the inside of the world and given it back for nothing exactly as Tibbet had hoped, that the nation was crowned again after 300 years, and that it knew whom to thank. Tibbet listened, and his awake old eyes got brighter, and he asked only one question, which was whether the child was all right, whether the quiet scrap with the poor thin face had found anyone to be a someone to him at last. And the makers told him that the child had found a nation, and Tibbet sat down on his folding stool behind his 10-pence table and put his coverless paperback face down on his knee and was quiet for a while, and then he said, "That's good, that's the best news I've had in 11 years of bad dreams, you tell him old Tibbet's glad." They gave him a thing before they went, a plain gray token he could keep in his pocket, that meant nothing to the upper world and meant, to any goblin who ever saw it, friend of the nation, safe passage, owed kindness, so that the lonely old squib who handled the things other people did not want to be alone in a room with would never again be alone with anything that meant him harm. He kept it the rest of his life. He never sold it, though it would have bought him out of the trade 10 times over because, as he told the child himself the one time Harry came to thank him in person, some things you don't sell, and the difference between selling and keeping is the whole of it. And Harry, who had learned that exact lesson from this exact man, hugged him, which startled them both, and old Tibbet patted the small back with a hand gone stiff and said, "Go on, Scrap, go on, you've a kingdom to get back to," and watched the child go. And went back to his book and was, for an old man at a jumble sale, about as content as the upper world allowed. The nation marked the day, too, for itself, in its own way, which was not a festival, because the goblins did not hold festivals, but a working. On the anniversary of the returning, every forge and every deep of the world would strike together at the hour the crown came home, one single blow, the whole nation's hammers falling as one across 10,000 miles of stone. A sound felt rather than heard, the deep saying to itself, "Once a year, forever we went on, we go on, the line did not break, a child carried our hand home." They called the day the returning, and they did not explain it to the upper world, and the upper world, feeling its iron ring faintly once a year on a summer morning and never knowing why, learned to call it nothing at all, which suited the nation, who had kept the best of itself behind a grill for 1,000 years and saw no reason to start explaining now. Doric mended slowly and complained the whole time, which everyone took correctly as the surest sign that he would live. The curse had gone deep, deeper than the river stairs, and for 3 days it was not certain, and Harry sat by the bed through all 3 and would not be sent away, and Grelda worked over the wound with her scarred hands until even she was gray with it, and on the 4th morning Doric opened his eyes and looked at the child asleep at last in the chair beside him with his head on the edge of the bed, and said to the room hoarsely, "Somebody move him before his neck sets like that. The little disaster will be no use to anyone as a champion if he can only look left." And Harry woke at the sound of the rough voice and did not move him, only grabbed the good hand and held it, and the two of them sat there in the warm red light not saying very much, which was its own kind of saying, the kind that does not need words because it is built on a fortnight of them and a life of them yet to come. When Doric could stand, the question that everyone had been not mentioning could no longer be not mentioned, and it was the question of where the child would live. It was harder than the upper world's treaty, because the upper world's treaty was about pride, and this was about a 5-year-old, and pride is simpler than a 5-year-old. There was the matter of the blood protection, which Dumbledore had anchored in Petunia Dursley's grudging guardianship, and which was real, the old wizard insisted, and not a thing to be thrown away lightly even by people who despised the house it lived in. It was his mother's sacrifice made law, made shelter, the one gift Lily Potter had left her son, and the only thing in the child's first 5 years that had truly kept him safe, little though the keeping had felt like love. And there was the matter of the cupboard, which the whole nation now knew about, and which no goblin would ever again allow a champion of theirs to be returned to, oath or no oath, blood ward or no blood ward, because there are some protections that protect the body by starving the heart, and a people who had spent 300 years learning the difference between a thing kept safe and a thing kept loved were not going to fail that lesson now. In the end it was Harry who solved it, because Harry had spent his whole life thinking about exactly this, and the adults had only just started. The protection's in being where my mum's blood is, Harry said, to the room of old goblins and one old wizard, working it out aloud, which is Aunt Petunia because she's my mum's sister. That's the rule, isn't it? I have to be where Aunt Petunia is sometimes, or the shelter stops working. Dumbledore inclined his head. But it never said I had to live in the cupboard. The cupboard wasn't the protection. The cupboard was just where they put me because they didn't want me in the house. So what if I go to Aunt Petunia's enough to keep the shelter alive, like watering a plant, but I don't live there, I live where I'm wanted here with Doric, with the nation, and when I have to go up and water the plant, Doric comes with me, and Aunt Petunia gets told by someone she's scared of that the cupboard is finished and the bedroom upstairs is mine and there will be a goblin checking. He looked around at the grown-ups. She's scared of things she can't push. She could never push me, but I was little and didn't know I was allowed to not be pushed. Now I know, and now there's a whole nation behind me, so she'll be polite. People like Aunt Petunia are always polite to things they're scared of. It's the only language she's got. I learned it living with her. There was a silence. The champion, said Ragnarok at last, dryly, has once again solved in 2 minutes a problem his elders had reserved 3 days for. I propose we simply start handing him the difficult files and going home early. So it was arranged, more or less as the 5-year-old had drawn it. Harry would keep the blood shelter alive with visits, enough and no more, and the visits would be made by a Harry who arrived in a coat that turned curses with a goblin at his shoulder and a nation at his back, to a house where the cupboard door had been taken off its hinges and burned in the nation's own forge by Harry's request, the first thing he ever asked the Forgemasters to make unmake instead of make. And the rest of the time, the most of the time, the real of the time, he would live in the deep, in the warm room under the carved ceiling whose lines never dead-ended, among the people who had chosen him, learning the struck tongue from Grelda and the deep roads from Doric and the long memory of a wronged and unbroken nation from the old ones in the evenings, growing up at last in a place where someone was glad each morning that he existed. Petunia Dursley, when the arrangement was explained to her by a keeper of the bank who did not raise his voice and did not need to, went the color of old paper, and looked at her nephew standing in her hallway in his strange gray coat with a gray creature at his side, and an iron ring round his neck and something in his face that had never been there before, something settled, something safe, and she understood. In the way that even small, frightened people understand large things when they are standing right in front of them, that the child she had spent 5 years making sure knew he was nothing had become somehow, while she was looking the other way, somebody, and that she had had the chance to be part of how, and had spent it on a cupboard, and that this was a thing she was going to have to live with quietly for the rest of an ordinary life in an ordinary house on an ordinary street. While the child from her cupboard walked back down into the earth to a kingdom that loved him, she did not apologize. She was not built for it. But she took the cupboard door off its hinges herself before the goblins came for it, which was the nearest thing to an apology Petunia Dursley had in her, and Harry, who was an expert in the small languages of difficult people, saw it for what it was and let it count. Albus Dumbledore came down into the deep exactly once that summer, and it was not for the treaty, and it was not for the guardianship, both of which his deputies could handle and did. He came down for a reason he gave to no one, which was that he wished to see the place, and the child in the place, and to take the measure of a thing he had decided he could no longer afford to misunderstand. They let him come under escort, blindfolded, for the deep roads, as was the law for any wizard, and they took the blindfold off at the rail of a high gallery, and Albus Dumbledore looked out over the underforge of Britain, the chasm and the bright river and the 10,000 stacked galleries and the everlasting hammers and the soul fire rising gold from the well beneath the great anvil, and the oldest and most traveled wizard of the age, who had seen the dragon fires of the east and the deep libraries of the dead and the high cold magics of the mountains, stood at the rail and said nothing for a long time, because there are sights that take all of a person's words at once and leave him only the looking, and he had not known in 110 years that this one was under his own country the whole while. "We let you see it," Stoneheart said beside him, "because Harry asked us to. He said you carry something too heavy and it has made you forget that the world is full of things that are real and not just useful, and he thought if you saw a real thing that you could never use, it might help. He is 5 and he prescribed you a view of my kingdom as medicine for your soul. I told him it would not work on a creature like you. He told me to let him be wrong his own way. So, be cured or do not, headmaster. The child meant it kindly, and kindness wasted on you is still kindness, and the nation has decided to stop counting the cost of kindness, having spent 300 years counting everything." Dumbledore was quiet a moment longer. Then he laughed very softly, and it had something in it that had not been there when he came down. "He is not wrong, you know," the old wizard said. "That is the trouble with the child, Forgemaster, and I suspect you have found it too. He is almost never wrong about the thing underneath the thing. I did come down here meaning to find a weakness. The seam, I called it to your keeper, the place where a wedge could one day be driven into your new loyalty, because that is how I have kept the world standing for 50 years, by finding the seam in every alliance and knowing where to press if pressing were ever required for the greater good. He turned from the rail and his tired eyes found Harry, who had come quietly to stand a little way off, watching, the flat patient attention, the deciding. And I find standing here that I do not want to, not because I have grown good, child, do not give me that credit, I have not earned it and I would only spend it badly. I find I do not want to because you have done a thing I did not think anyone could still do to me, which is make me ashamed of the habit while I was in the middle of it. You looked at me on the marble and told me I treat people like parcels, and you were right, and I have been treating people like parcels for so long and for such excellent reasons that I had stopped being able to feel it, and you made me feel it in one sentence at 5, and I have not been able to stop feeling it since, and it is the most inconvenient gift anyone has given me in half a century. It's not a gift, Harry said, it's just true, you can have true things for free. That's the whole point of them, nobody owns true. No, Dumbledore agreed, no, I am learning that nobody does. He lowered himself with the effort of great age onto a stone bench worn smooth by 100 generations of resting feet, so that he was not looming over the child, and he looked at Harry on the level, and he spoke to him then not as a guardian or a strategist or the greatest wizard of the age, but as one tired person to another, which was the most honest he had been with anyone in longer than Harry had been alive. I am going to tell you a hard thing, Harry, because you are the rare sort who would rather have the hard thing than the comfortable lie, and because you will find it out anyway, and I would rather you heard it from me. There is a war coming back, not soon, but coming. And there is a reason I hid you, and a reason I needed you grounded and reachable, and the reason is not that I am cruel, though I have done cruel things, it is that the war is going to come looking for you specifically, you, and when it does, I had meant to have spent your whole childhood making you into the kind of weapon that could survive it. That was my plan. I am telling you it failed on a noon in July when you turned out to be a person instead of a parcel, and I am telling you I am glad it failed, which is the truest and most frightening thing I have said in 50 years, because if you are a person and not a weapon then I do not know how the war is won, and I have built my whole life on knowing how the war is won. He spread his old hands, so here we both are. You have allies I cannot command, and a heart I cannot harden, and a clarity I cannot fog, and I have a war I do not know how to win without the very things you refuse to let me make of you. We are going to spend the next 11 years finding out whether your way or my way keeps the world standing. I think it is going to be the most important argument of my life. I think I am going to lose it, and I find, to my very great surprise, that I hope I do. Harry came and sat on the bench beside the old wizard, which surprised everyone, including Harry. You don't have to win the war by making a weapon, Harry said. That's just the only way you've let yourself think of. You're doing the thing you do where you decide the rules first and then you're sad about the rules, but you keep them anyway because you forgot you made them up. Doric does it less now. I made him stop a bit. He swung his feet, which did not reach the floor. When the war comes, you won't have a weapon. You'll have me and Doric and the whole nation and Grelda's knife that won't be cruel, and you being less of a parcel person, and a lot of people who love each other, which you think is the soft thing but I think is the hard thing, because look how hard it was for you to even come down here and look at something you couldn't use. Loving things you can't use is the hardest magic there is. You should learn it. You've got 11 years. I'll help. I'm good at it. I practiced on people who never loved me back, so I'm basically a champion at it, same as the iron thing. He looked up at the old wizard, and his clear child's eyes were merciless and kind at once, the way only the very young and the very honest can be. You can be my friend now, I decided. You asked the right way just now, the true way, the not-using way, even though you didn't know you were doing it. So yes, but I'm still going to watch you. Friends watch each other. That's not the same as not trusting. It's a better thing. It's the thing where you love somebody and you don't pretend they're finished growing. Albus Dumbledore, the greatest and most dangerous and most carefully frozen wizard of his age, sat on a worn stone bench a mile beneath England beside a 5-year-old who had just offered him friendship and supervision in the same breath and called it a better thing, and discovered that the long-frozen something far down in him, the thing that had shifted a half-inch toward thaw on the marble, shifted again, further painfully, the way a limb hurts when the blood comes back, and that he was, for the first time in 50 years, and to his own complete astonishment, near tears in front of another living soul. Yes, he said when he could. All right, yes, I would like that very much, Harry. I accept the friendship and the watching and the lessons, and I will try, very hard and probably fail often, to become a person worth the trouble you are clearly going to be. He stood slowly, and his eyes had cleared, and the steel was still in him, because the steel was who he was, but the steel had been joined now by something it had been missing for a very long time. The nation chose well Forgemaster, better than it knows, better than the world deserves. He inclined his head to Stoneheart and to Harry and turned for the long blindfolded road up. I came down to find a seam. I am going up having found, instead, a teacher, at 110. Iron help me, as your people say, iron help us all. The wonders, when they came, were not given to Harry. They were given to the Harry he would become, which the nation, with its long sight, regarded as a different and more interesting person than the small one currently swinging his feet off benches. Grelda had promised him blades and armor and wonders, and she made them that summer and the summers after, the way her people made everything slowly, with the whole of herself, and she did not hand them to a 5-year-old who would only have used the sword as a stick and the armor as a tent. She made them and she set them aside in a vault struck deep under the forge, the champion's vault, Shadur Ragnar's vault, a chamber that opened only to the iron ring Harry wore and would grow into. And into it, year by year, the makers laid the gifts they were forging against the day the child was a man and the war Dumbledore feared came looking for him specifically. A blade longer and graver than the freeing knife that drank what struck it and gave it back. A coat of forge cloth grown to a man's frame. A helm. A set of plain gray rings, one for each year of waiting, that any goblin of any deep would know. The wonders accumulated in the dark, patient as the crown had been patient, warm as everything the nation made was warm, waiting for a Harry who could lift them. And Harry visited the vault sometimes and looked at the gathering future of himself and found it mostly a bit alarming, and was glad on the whole that he did not have to be it yet, and went back up to the warm room to read the struck tongue with Grelda and be 5. Because that was the gift under all the other gifts, the one no forge could strike, the one the whole long adventure had been secretly about from the church hall onward. Harry got to be 5. He got to be a child, finally properly late, the way a flower that has been kept in a cupboard opens late, and all at once when you finally carry it to a window. He learned to read, and not only the struck tongue. He learned that food came every day and was not taken back. He learned that a friend at your shoulder was a thing you could count on and not a thing that would be used against you. He learned slowly over that summer and the years that followed it, the single fact that the cupboard had been built to keep from him, which was that he was wanted, that his existence was, to a whole nation, an abound seeker, and even, in his frozen thawing way, to an old wizard in a tower, good news. He had returned a crown and triggered an oath and toppled a collector and rewritten 1,000 years of wizard-goblin law, and the most important thing he ever got back for any of it was the ordinary childhood the upper world had stolen from him as casually as the Burkes had stolen the crown, returned to him now by the only people who had ever understood that some thefts are quiet, and some hands are taken a little at a time. He had a birthday that summer, which was a thing that had never happened to him before. It had happened, technically, 5 times. He had been born, and the calendar had come round, and the day had passed each year in the cupboard unmarked, except by the particular silence of a household that has decided not to know what day it is. Harry had stopped expecting it to be anything. So when Doric came to fetch him on the last morning of July with a strange, stiff formality and would not say why, and led him not to Grelda's forge, but down a stair he had not been down, into a small warm hall he had not seen, Harry did not understand what was happening even when he saw it, because he had no template for it, no memory to match it against. The hall was full of goblins. Not the whole nation, not the rank on rank of the returning, but 100 or so, the ones he knew now, the old keepers who made steps of their hands, the makers from Grelda's forge, Ragnar in his somber office gray looking faintly embarrassed to be there and there anyway, and Stoneheart at the head of them, and on a long stone table was food, more than even a goblin household would eat, and a thing in the center that Harry's eyes slid off of because he could not place it until Doric said gruffly, "It's a cake. You small disaster, it's for you, it's your hatching day, your born day, whatever your folk call it. We asked the records and worked it out, you're 6 today, and a champion of the nation does not turn 6 in a cupboard, not while there's a forge standing. So, happy born day, don't make a speech, you'll set everyone off." Harry looked at the cake and the hall and the 100 faces of the people who had chosen him, turned toward him glad on a day that had been nothing his whole life and was, suddenly, a thing the whole room had gathered to say mattered because he had been born, only that he existed and had been born and they were glad of it, and the wobble came into his face and he did not fight it and did not pretend, and Bodroth Stoneheart, eldest of the Forgemasters, who had knelt to him once already, said into the warm hall in his voice like struck iron, "We are glad you were born, Shadur Ragnar. The whole nation is glad you were born. We will say it every year now at this hour so that you never again pass this day not knowing it. You were born and it was good and we are glad." And the hall said it back, 100 voices, "We are glad you were born," and Harry, 6 years old, cried at his first birthday in the arms of a bad-tempered seeker while a kingdom told him his existence was good news. And it was, in a life that would hold a great many large and terrible and shining things, the moment he would reach back for first every time ever after, when he needed to remember what he had been fighting for all along. Doric mended all the way in the end and took up his bound work, which was Harry, and was insufferable about it, exactly as he had promised on the night he came up into the wizard world to die. He went where Harry went. He pulled Harry out of the kind, stupid, beautiful trouble Harry walked into with a regularity that became, in the deep, a kind of running joke and a kind of legend both, because a champion who would not take and could not stop helping turned out to be a full-time occupation for one bad-tempered seeker, and Doric would not have traded the occupation for a forge of his own and the rule of the eastern deeps, and said so, often, gruffly. Usually while bandaging some new evidence of Harry's inability to walk past a creature in distress. And the crown sat in its cradle on the great anvil in the soul-fire home awake, the names of the nations dead and not yet born glowing warm and steady along its band, and among them, lit and permanent, the name the goblins had given a wizard child, Shadu or Ragnuk, the friend the crown chose, so that for as long as the crown endured, every goblin who put a hand to it in the deepest dark anywhere on the earth would feel, woven through the certainty that the nation went on. Small warm presence of the child who had carried it home for nothing. On the last evening of that first summer, before the long argument of the years began in earnest, Harry went down to the forge alone, except that he was never alone now, so Doric came too, a few steps behind, giving him the room. The great cavern was quiet as it ever got, which was to say that the everlasting hammers had gone to their night rhythm, slow and far and constant, the nation's pulse banked but never stopped. The soul fire rose gold from the well, the crown glowed in its cradle. And Harry climbed up onto the joined hands of two of the old keepers who had been standing their honor watch and made the step for him without being asked, the way they had on the night of the return, and he leaned over the warm black anvil and put one finger very gently on the band of the crown, on the place where the writing meant the thing he had not had a word for, the place where mine and ours and home were all the same word. The crown brightened under his fingertip, the way it had in the dark of a cupboard 100 years and one summer ago, the way breath brightens a coal. And the hammering came up to meet him, not the grieving note he had first heard 3 valleys off through a carpet tile, and not the cry of the lost, but the deep steady glad pulse of a thing that was, finally, exactly where it ought to be. And it said the same thing it had always said, the only thing it had ever said, the word that was not a word here, except that now, at last, the here was true for both of them. The crown in its cradle and the child who had carried it, both of them home. Both of them wanted, both of them, after their long and separate cupboards, somewhere on purpose at last. Harry stood on the joined hands of the old keepers, small against the vast lit dark of the forge of the nation, with his finger on the soul of a people and his friend a few steps behind him, and his name struck in the rock among the honored dead, and 11 years of gathering wonders waiting in a vault, and a whole kingdom's everlasting hammers keeping, far below, the slow patient time his own heart had kept since a church jumble on an ordinary Saturday, and he did not say anything. Because some things take all of a person's words and leave him only the warmth, and he had words enough now for the rest of his life and could afford to spend this one moment with none of them. He just stood there, his hand on the warm iron, and let it be home and let himself be home, and felt the nation breathe around him in the dark it had learned to light, and was glad, all the way down, with nothing left over to be afraid of. Behind him, Doric watched the small figure against the great fire and pressed one flat hand to his own chest, to the place where the certainty of the line lived, the certainty a wizard child had carried home for free, and held it there and did not say anything either. The fire rose, the hammers kept their slow glad time. And in the deepest forge under England, the iron oath, sworn for the 3rd time in 400 years to a boy who had asked for nothing, settled into the long living work of being kept, which is the only thing an oath is for, and is harder than any forging, and lasts, if it is a true one, longer than the iron it is sworn on. Chapter 7 End.